I just heard it.
You watch some of these?
I have not.
Yeah, they're actually well done.
You just got over the COVID.
Lisa and I had it through Christmas, right up to Christmas.
How'd you know you had it?
I had a 101 temperature and just went and got tested. I didn't have a lot of
You
symptoms.
feel bad?
You know, the first week I thought, this is not that big a deal. And the second week, the fatigue hit. You could just feel it sort of run through your muscles. And that was the worst part, was the fatigue.
So you didn't have any breathing problems?
No, Lisa's funny. She tends to, especially with me, exaggerate a little bit. So I had the thermometer because I had it first. She tested positive. The health part took 2 or 3 days, and I was able to find one spot. I had to drive to Chattanooga to get an instant test. And so I knew, so it took 2 or 3 days for her. So she comes in one night and says, my temperature's 103. And I got a little upset at that because that's dangerous temperature. And so I honestly put a mask on, drove out to the drugstore and bought another thermometer. I had tried to wash the thermometer and ruined it.
Yeah.
And I took her temperature and it was 99.8 or something like that. And so a few days into the second week, she said, I just can't breathe. So I went out and bought a pulse oximeter and put it on her. And, well, you're 94% oxygenated. So I don't worry as much about me, but she scares me. So I go buy, something to test her. So neither one of us, we just felt bad is the worst of it.
My son had it, and he had a little tightness in the chest, stayed in his room for 14 days. Did you stay in?
I stayed in. I came off, and my temperature had been gone for 4 or 5 days. And I went back to the office one day, and I just didn't have the strength to do it. It was the weakness. And so then I took another week off just to rest. I didn't have a temperature but a day or two.
It's so random how it affects people.
And it doesn't really have anything. Healthy people have it bad. Smokers have it good. You don't know.
Well, I should have, because my daughter's really worried about it. She works for the Hamilton County Medical Society, so she puts out the statements and the studies and things. And I kept telling her, I said, Alex, honey, I see 40 people a day, and I'm right in their face, and I'm using something that aerosols. I should have had it months and months and months ago. I don't know how I went this long. I thought I was
wear a mask, right?
That's a whole other argument with me. That's a bunch of bull.
As you're doing your dentistry, so I guess
the mask is, to be honestly, a bunch of bull. That is a political statement to deal with people's fears.
But doctors have been wearing masks.
We wear that for spittle. It catches spittle. It catches.
Isn't that what the virus is in?
No, it's the aerosolized. The masks filter between 150 to about 100 microns. The virus is 0.07 microns. There's a study that showed 15 minutes of exposure with or without a mask makes no difference. It's going to transmit. California, the most locked down state in the country, has the highest spike right now. If not for California, the total number in the rest of the country would be declining right now. California is the entirety of our increase.
That's the one that...
And it's the most locked down, most mask-wearing state in the country.
I watch that world meter every night. You ever go online? I go on every night and I watch it. I don't know why.
Look, the masks are fine. I don't have a problem with people wearing masks if it makes them feel more comfortable. I do have a problem with our authorities assuring people that the mask is a solution, and it's not.
Well,
the science, what does the science say, right?
Well, the science is saying something a little different from what John said.
That's not true.
Yeah.
It is because
it depends on the scientist you talk to, I guess, right?
There's a substantial body of evidence coming out that it's not just getting exposed to the virus, it's how much of the viral load you get exposed to initially that may control how severe your symptoms are.
That's what I think.
And what happens is the majority of the virus that you expel if you've got it is bound up in moisture droplets.
But there's a difference.
And the masks do lower the amount of virus that gets through. It doesn't stop it.
Well, first off, these things that people are wearing, the little nylon things, they actually disperse it more. If you cough through one of those, they're small enough, they actually disperse it more. Secondly, the Academy of American Physicians and Surgeons put out a policy paper back in the spring. Now, Facebook locked it down, wouldn't show it, said they're a bunch of kooks. That's an organization that's been around since 1947. But their policy was, A, they went through the size of the virus and the amount of microns that the masks filter. But B, they said, we actually believe it makes it worse because people don't know how to wear masks. They touch them improperly. I talk to people all the time. I said, how long have you been wearing that mask? 2 weeks. Everything you've been around for the last 2 weeks is on that mask, and you're carrying it with you everywhere you go. So that the physicians and surgeons said they touched their mask, they touched their face. The worst part was it gave them a false sense of confidence, and they didn't social distance, and they didn't wash their hands like they should. And those are actually the most important things. And you can see it anecdotally all over the world. The most locked down, the most mask-wearing countries and states are the highest spikes right now. It makes no difference. Fauci was right in March when he said there's no science but you shouldn't be wearing a mask.
It's absolutely true that the social distancing's the most important.
And the hand washing.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about hand washing, doctors have been telling us to wash our hands for decades.
You know, I was standing in line at the Starbucks, and I had to sneeze now, and I had my mask on, and it came out. I thought, well, I hit the person on the side.
Absolutely. And the
that's
shields are worse than that. The shields do nothing. They catch spittle, but the shields just... The point is, it's a virus, and this is what viruses do. And the only way to get ahead of this is either herd immunity or the vaccine.
Which we're doing. That's
Slowly, but yes.
You know, they say the bank robbers now are having to label their mask that says robber so that people will know.
Well, now, actually, that
The beauty of that is, though, have you ever seen a bank surveillance video that you could actually make out? Who it was?
You can't.
But that's actually tangent to another discussion that we're not allowed to have. The lockdown of information is what bothers me, because science is not a fact. Science has facts in it, but science is made up of conflicting ideas and conflicting hypotheses and the argument. We have locked the argument down. The CDC director, the same week he testified to Congress that he thought a mask was actually more important than the vaccine, which is a ridiculous statement. That same week, he gave a press conference, which nobody covered this little paragraph. He said, we fully expect the death toll from the lockdowns to be double the death toll from the virus itself. Now, if I told you you've got cancer and it has a 30% chance of killing you, but I've got a treatment that has a 60% chance of killing you, would you take the treatment?
No.
That's a significant statement. The death toll from the lockdown we expect will be double the death toll. Japan, now keep in mind, Japan has a high suicide culture. But in October of this year, there's all kinds of discussion about that.
Stress and pressure.
Yeah. But in October of this year, they had more suicides than the entire year before. In 1 month, they had more suicides than the entire year before. Knoxville, Tennessee, in I think April, the mayor said, we've had more suicides this month than we had all of last year. We're not discussing the death toll from the lockdown.
I think that what John just said is right. I think we're not having that discussion, but I think the reason is because we've politicized the whole discussion.
Well,
And so-
We can't have the
now-
discussion because we've already
No,
polarized.
we didn't politicize it.
'Cause-
One side politicized it, and the media politicized it because it was worth it to take down a president.
You think that's the real reason?
Well, think of it this way, and I got into this with my daughter. My daughter wanted to lock down. And I said, Alex, you're still getting a paycheck. Every one of those pundits on TV, every one of those media people on TV who are advocating the lockdown, every one of them still got a paycheck. It was a minor inconvenience to them. 60% of the restaurants in the country that have closed because of the lockdown are closed permanently. Those are people's lives. Those are families that are destroyed.
It's very unfortunate, no matter how you slice it, isn't it?
I heard Five Guys is closing. I hate that.
Nationwide, not just.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, the whole chain is going under, it looks like.
Probably
Do you
because
think
of
if we'd
this.
have ignored the whole pandemic at all, that we'd have already had herd immunity, or would it have massively
I think
killed
it's a terrible
everybody?
virus. It's not it's a slightly more deadly than the flu. Now that's another thing. John Hopkins did a study. They posted it for about a day before the scolds forced them to take it down. Now nobody really argued with the study itself. One of the arguments was the woman that did the study, the doctor, is a PhD in economics. And they said, well, she's an economist, she's not a virologist. But the study wasn't about the virus, the study was about the numbers. And so at the time, we were 250,000 people had died from the virus. If you look at the annualized death in America, it's a pretty constant line. And we have 4 leading causes: heart disease, cancer, pneumonia, and I don't remember the 4th one. So you would expect,
Obesity.
you would expect a 250,000 bump in the number of deaths. No bump at all. Straight flat line, just like she went back 8 or 10 years. So she said, well, let me look at the elderly. No increase in the elderly death line. And so her, as an economist, that's what they do. They deal with numbers. She said, something's not right here. So she looks at the 4 leading causes of death. All 4 of them have declined this year. When you total up the decline of those 4 categories, they almost exactly equal the increase of COVID deaths. Now, her point wasn't that all of these deaths have been mislabeled. There is a significant number that are mislabeled. We have all kinds of anecdotal evidence of that. But her point was, most of these people, if you died in April of COVID, you were probably dying in May of cancer or of COPD. So there's no bump in the death numbers.
Well, I'd have to disagree.
Maybe it speeds it up.
There are studies.
What
that have
happened to
come
the
out in
flu, Franklin?
There are studies that have come out in the last couple of months which show hundreds of thousands of what they call excess deaths this year.
I understand
which
that.
is simply saying, no, hold on.
But the numbers don't add up.
No, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Which is not attributing a cause to it, but simply, are there more deaths this year than last year?
She did the study.
Okay.
She's a PhD from Johns Hopkins.
And she has found, I don't know about this particular study, but there's
That's
a couple.
because you haven't been allowed to see it.
That's because there's a couple of others out now.
I
that have
posted it.
found just
Facebook took it down.
that finding. And so,
Where's the
does
flu,
that
Franklin?
necessarily mean that COVID caused it? Well, actually, flu deaths are down this year
Right, why?
because of social distancing.
They're almost non-existent.
Because of social distancing, and because there was a fair amount of evidence early on which suggested that if you got the flu and COVID, it was very bad for you.
This is
so
the
more people got the
I think
vaccine.
This
that's
is
a
the
big part
first
of it.
year in history
It's-
that the CDC didn't make a distinction between died from and died with.
Yeah.
In previous years, they made a distinction of died from, died with. This year they did not. So, for example, there were 2 20-year-olds that died in July down in Florida. So one of the newspapers said, well, that's an unusual demographic to have died from COVID. So they called the state coroner and they say, did either of these guys have comorbidities? Said, well, one of them did, and he died in a motorcycle wreck. But he's listed as a COVID death. We had a lady in Shelby County, Tennessee. Her family got notice in September that she tested positive for COVID in June. She had died in February.
Well, it's not a mirage that the number of people in ICUs is up significantly.
Well, here's another problem
Yeah.
with that.
That's-
If you
there's
end
gotta
up
be a
in the
cause for
ICU
that.
for, let's say you have COPD, and you end up in the ICU, and they test you and you have COVID, but you're showing no symptoms of COVID, you're listed as a COVID patient. Because they get $13,000 for every COVID patient. I've had 2 patients in my office tell me that a family member died. The hospital came to them and said, hey, you've got a $4,500 bill. If we list this as COVID, the government will take care of it and wipe it out for you. If we can change the listing on the death certificate to COVID.
And guess what they said?
They said, absolutely.
No
And
problem.
if they put them on a ventilator, they get $39,000 for being put on a ventilator.
It's very bad, no matter how you slice it. And there's not anything we can do about it. We're just
You can wash
pawns in
your
this
hands
thing.
and-
Whether one, I believe this. I believe science is. I believe the science is right. I believe some scientists are wrong. Does that make sense? The science is the
Yes,
science.
it's also true. John sort of touched on that a moment ago. It's not like in March or April the science was definitive on COVID.
Nobody had it.
The
It couldn't be.
Because they were learning
But the
about it.
science
and
was
they were-
definitive
well,
on
let me finish for
viruses.
just a moment.
Viruses are not new.
No, viruses are not new, but the effects of a particular virus is new to them.
Especially
and
when
they
it's
gave
man-made.
the best guidance that they could with the
At the
information
time.
they had available.
That's right.
And they have learned more as months have gone along, and the guidance gets better.
And the guidance will be different in 6 months.
It may be.
Well, I can give you the guidance
It
from
evolves.
someone-
It evolves.
Yes, but I can give you where it evolved from Fauci and then devolved from Fauci and then evolved again. They actually caught Governor Cuomo on a recording where he said, none of this works. He said, the people are scared and we're just throwing this out to make them feel like we're doing something.
Yeah.
And that's the best governor in the whole world with
Yeah.
the highest death rate.
Theoretically.
No, not theoretically.
I mean,
Florida-
theoretically, he's the best.
Florida's the worst.
We got
Florida and Texas combined don't equal California's death rate. Per 100,000, not total numbers.
But I mean, he's not the best governor for sure.
He's the worst governor.
The worst governor.
But the
Yeah,
media
yeah.
has made him into the best governor.
There's a significant.
they're having a hard. That's a hard sell.
He won an Emmy.
I don't think I don't know whether he's the best or the worst or somewhere in the middle. What I think he got kudos for was just looking people in the eye and telling them, "This is serious. I'm worried,
And-
and
and-
we're
All right,
trying
And
hard."
Franklin.
I applaud him for getting
Yeah.
on stage every day and giving an update. You know, that's a big deal.
Did he ever
when
update?
you're scared?
Did he ever update the fact that he forced nursing homes to take COVID positive patients in, killed over 6,000 of them, then scrubbed the order from the state website?
I think people felt like he was on it, and that gave him some level,
And that is what people want from
a
the
level,
All right, hang
a
on.
level of comfort.
Let me agree with you and disagree with you. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because the media painted him that way.
Yeah.
And the media painted Ron DeSantis the opposite way in Florida. Florida's numbers are tremendously better than New York's numbers. But they have continuously said, Cuomo did a great job, DeSantis did a terrible job. That's the worst thing about this election. It's the worst thing about this COVID. The media has lost any pretense of objectivity. They are players in the market now, and it's on Franklin's side right now, but it still ought to scare the hell out of him because we only know what we can find. I posted the John Hopkins study on Facebook. They blocked it. And they forced John Hopkins to pull it down off their website. Now, I'm perfectly fine if another statistician or economist comes in and tears the story apart, tears the study apart. But to simply say, we're not going to let the public see this is an incredibly dangerous cultural phenomenon.
You're referring to social media, did they?
I'm referring not just to social media, to the news media itself. They're on your
Well,
side,
you-
Franklin.
No.
But they're
I'm not
still,
getting
it's
into that.
dangerous.
I just meant you said they blocked it and took it down. Who was it?
Well,
You're
it's
talking
like the
about
Hunter
social media.
Biden story, Franklin.
Right.
37% of
I guess
Biden voters had never heard about the Hunter Biden story.
Facebook, you mean?
Facebook,
Now
Twitter,
that's
Google.
That's a serious issue, but it's a complicated issue.
It's
Facebook
very
and
complicated.
Google are private companies.
They're private companies, and that almost goes back to your initial point. It's are we if I'm free not to wear a mask, shouldn't they be free to take it down? Not that I agree with it, but we got to agree that
Yes and no.
you know what I'm saying. That either
That's the same argument about the antitrust problems that we had at the turn
that's
of
the
the
problem,
20th century. You know, but I'm a big supporter of free business, but I think they are cutting their own throats. And in fact, they're cutting people like me that traditionally would have supported the philosophy of leaving them alone because they are not being fair arbiters. You know, for example, the antitrust suits in the turn of the 20th century, the big oil companies and all, there was always the profit motive there. And that's what that was basically about, was the profit motive. These guys don't care about profit motive anymore. It's philosophical. You know, they have a certain...
Philosophical has to always go back to profits.
But my point is that the oil companies had a product to sell, an actual physical product. These guys control information.
They actually do have a product, and that's the sneaky part of it that people don't understand.
You mean the ads and the sales?
No, the information they're gathering on you.
Well, that's true. That's a whole different
discussion. You log
discussion.
on to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
Buy a pair of
boots.
boots.
It drives information to you based upon what you've been looking at. And so it confirms whatever you thought.
But that's a different discussion from not allowing...
No, but that's the product they're selling.
I understand.
Because they're taking that information about you, and if they know you like blue jeans, they're selling your information to people who run blue jeans ads. And that's how they make money.
That's their commodity.
But the commodity is information about you.
What the old timers would call data.
But that is a secondary layer. The original companies were all about basically a pipeline, and they were a pipeline for the individual citizens to be able to put out and to receive information. And they are now controlling that pipeline.
I don't think that's necessarily true, that that's what they were about, because I think these tech wizards instantly realized what they had there was access to information, otherwise, frankly, private information about you and your peccadillos and
You mean they knew what you would give them?
They knew what you like.
I don't know if that's private once you put it online. If I put it online, I got to accept that somebody.
Well, but it's not even that. It's Google. It's if I simply do Google searches. Okay, I may not be posting anything, but they're seeing what you searched.
I searched for leather boots, and the next day I'll have an ad for leather boots.
The next day you may have it in an hour.
Well, I can tell you that last night I was reading an article on the supply chain.
I wish I'd have thought of it.
Well,
the supply chain for ammo. And in the middle of this article, it had a graph, and it showed the spikes on Google search to the day. This day they spiked, that day they spiked, and it showed the buying and when demand hit the highest.
And if you're searching for leather boots and you start getting ads for leather boots, there's a pretty good chance you're going to buy some leather boots.
You know, an interesting thing, back when they used to have this, they'd send you this screensaver, a different picture all the time. If you move the cursor up to the right corner, it'll have 3 little dots. And if you click on the dot, it'll say, do you like this picture? And I was saying, no, yes. I just answered the question. Next thing I know, it was yes, 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 yes. They were sending me pictures that I liked. I didn't even know I would hear. You know, I don't know if it was reds or pictures of old wood or whatever, but they were able to.
If you leave that alone, you will get pictures of things you didn't know existed. And some of them you may find absolutely beautiful, and so that expands your knowledge. But as you click on that, your knowledge begins to be channeled into a narrower and narrower field. So
there's a whole...
But now maybe this is not a new thing. Maybe 30 years ago, when you could subscribe to these magazines,
you could, but
if I subscribed to these 3, they would send me an ad for this.
But there was no
maybe
way
there's
to
nothing
compile
new
that
about this
immediately
well,
like this is.
That's true.
It's the immediacy of it, and it's the sheer amount of it. We all got smartphones. They're recording that you went into Walmart. They're recording that you went to Five Guys, that you went to Hall Chevrolet when it was open. Okay. And they're building this huge
and what does that mean? I don't know.
Well, it's called data mining.
Maybe
there are people who will buy your information. It's out there available right now. And the information isn't your Social Security number. They don't care about that.
It's when I go to when I most likely go to Staples.
Habits, all the things you've professed.
Well, let me give you another layer here.
I go to Starbucks at 8 o'clock in the morning. And about 9 o'clock, they'll send me a rewards email.
I mean, if you were building houses as you've done, or buildings, all right, and you knew in advance all the colors that your buyer likes,
or what you would pay more for,
the things
that's what would be in the house.
Yeah.
What an advantage that would be for you. Well, that's exactly what's happening.
Let me put another layer to this. So we have a terrorist, and we have his Apple
Well, your
iPhone.
hair's gotten long.
It has. This
How
is my
come?
COVID protest hair.
Radicals always grow their hair
This
long.
is my
But
protest
if
hair.
it's COVID
Hippies-
protest,
Hippies
Well, I
on
can
the
tell you.
left, this is
They're hippies
When
on the left.
when I got COVID, the regular thought was, I am cutting this damn stuff off. It is in the way.
But
and it's
that couldn't have
aggravating.
grown in 3 weeks.
No, it's
You
back
got a-
when,
It's
back when
got about a good
COVID
6,
started.
9
You
months
got
in there,
you got
I
a nice head of hair.
Okay. We've got a terrorist with
More than I got.
Yeah.
with an
More
apple.
than I got.
Well, my brother's losing his hair, so I may just be
If
aggravating
I
the
had
hell out
if
of
you had
him.
my face and I had your hair, we'd have some.
Okay. Apple refused to unlock that terrorist's cell phone to the U.S. government, to the military. At the same time, they are sharing all of these secrets, all of these habit patterns that we're talking about with the Chinese military. So they won't give us one terrorist cell phone, but they are selling the entire country's
Who's they?
Apple. Apple, they have a deal with the Chinese military. Well, they have a Chinese government, but the Chinese government is the Chinese military. They are giving the Chinese military more information about us than they will give our own government about us.
Well, they need to stop that, don't they?
How are you going to stop it?
And who are they?
Well, first off, they're an international company. Apple iPhones are made
Yeah,
in
so you can't do nothing
Indonesia.
about it, I guess.
So if you did anything to them, they just close up shop in America and say, well, we'll just produce over there. We're not an American company anymore. These things are getting more and more and more
You
complicated.
could start making an argument for a one world government because
No,
everything's
I
so
think this is
connected.
an argument against a one world government.
Well, you could make that. This is the argument for either or. You could argue either or, maybe.
One world government's just that much more powerful.
But if you were protesting your COVID protest, then you would get a haircut, wouldn't you?
Well, I
Then
thought
you go
with,
with-
actually,
you know what I'm
I
saying?
thought with the
No,
Antifa
that's too logical.
and the Biden supporters, I would be able to blend into their ranks and get behind them, behind enemy lines.
So, what do you think if you had, the government can't take over the media or the newspaper?
Well, right now they're not liable to be sued. And so if they damage you, you can't sue them. And we did that as a government to encourage the growth of these markets. But a lot of Republicans and actually some Democrats, the conservatives and liberals on either end of the spectrum would like to see that, what is it,
Section 230.
230,
Yeah.
Section 230 repealed.
What they did was say that they're just providing a stage
Right.
for other people to provide information.
So they
And
shouldn't be
They're not
liable.
responsible for anything that's on that stage.
They're not a
or
publisher.
said on
Isn't that okay?
Well, that's the argument.
Yes, but
Yeah.
they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, that's the
I mean,
thing.
you just said you had a guy on with a Trump shirt.
Yeah, and they won't
wouldn't
have-
allow you to boost it. That's an editorial decision on their part. And so what they're doing now is basically we want the power of a publisher to say yay or nay, but we don't want the liability of a publisher.
But that action that's taking place has been done largely in response to criticisms of them having unlimited ability to publish it without any ramifications at all.
Well, I was watching Andy Griffith the other night, and I hate to, I know this is like comical,
You can never
like
go wrong with quoting Andy
but I had and I just something came to my mind. In Floyd's barber shop, they had a bulletin board, and you could post your job. And I thought, that's just what the newspaper is, and what Facebook is, and any other type of media platform. Floyd was the guy that was allowing people to put something on his board. Mm-hmm. So did Floyd have the right to say, I'm not going to let you sell your lawnmower
Well, he did
on my...
have the right.
Because
to do
he's a
that,
private
because
citizen.
He's a private citizen.
But the difference
So,
here,
so that should be the same.
But the difference is traditionally the newspaper or the television station is responsible for the content they put out. And if you could show that they had a reason to believe what they put out was false, you might be able to sue them, for example, if they hurt your reputation.
If Floyd hurts their reputation.
Yeah, well,
no.
in that
If
case,
Floyd
because he
allows someone else to
allows
hurt
somebody
you,
else to hurt
You see what I'm saying? Which one was Floyd?
All right, Floyd is the owner of the company.
Of the store.
But let me contrast it. So if
Okay.
you've got the owner of a paper and the owner of Facebook, the paper,
Say Floyd.
if someone says, I want to buy X column inches, and they go in there and they say, Franklin Chancey is a lying, stealing rapist. And Franklin can say, this damaged me, and show his damages. He can sue the paper for allowing that person to say that.
But isn't
They're
that
saying something false.
False.
But isn't that a separate thing?
No. That's the
Not from
point
Facebook,
here.
it's not,
In
because
Facebook,
there's a statute, a law, that means no matter what they put on there, they can't be held responsible.
But the point
No
of it
matter-
was
Well, you
that
had to
it
stop
was
and think about
absolute.
that.
But that's now the point of it
Which
was.
one? But which one is Floyd?
Floyd is the paper or Facebook. But the difference is in Facebook's position, their argument originally was, we're not going to be responsible for anything. We're
Facebook is closer to Floyd.
We're going to
They're
open this
closer to-
up
and
we're
that's a
going to
good
allow.
thing.
But now Floyd is picking and choosing. Floyd is
Doesn't
saying,
Floyd have that right?
well, he may, but you can't sue Floyd.
The difference is
Yeah. They need.
And the difference is,
the question is, has
Ooh, it's
Facebook
tough.
become, this is the argument from a legal standpoint,
Yeah.
has Facebook and Twitter and so forth become what we used to think of as the public square?
right. Is it a
And
utility?
that's a place where people can
A
come
utility.
say whatever
That's
they
the
want,
word.
whatever they want. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be a marketplace of ideas. Okay.
Yeah.
Which in theory is a great thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is there is nobody checking those things.
But some of us don't want anybody
And so
checking
then
those
they
things.
take off. And
Yeah.
so, well, hold on. But I mean, everybody's heard of the concept of going viral, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, something goes viral that happened at 9 o'clock this morning, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 50 million people have seen it. It does not matter tomorrow if somebody comes out and says, that wasn't really right. Because that wasn't really right didn't go viral. And the damage is already done. And is that fair? Is that what we want?
So the way
That's
to fix
the
that
debate
is to
we're
take
having.
away their
Is that what we want?
you
That's the
take
question.
away
That's
their
the question.
liability protection, and then they have a vested interest in not allowing things. I'll give you a perfect example. Now, it's a partisan example, but Harry Reid. In 2012, Harry Reid said, I know for a fact Mitt Romney hasn't paid any income taxes for 10 years. Now, he's the majority leader of the United States Senate. That was covered, this isn't even about Facebook, this is about the news media, covered everywhere. They came to him after the election was over, and they said, well, look, here's all the data. And he said, yeah, I knew it wasn't true, but it worked, didn't it? He knew that when he said that, it would go viral,
So
like
in your
he
opinion,
said.
he should be liable?
And he could be in that circumstance.
As an
because he's not a
individual.
company, he's an individual. Okay?
But Facebook's
That's right.
not.
But my
Yeah.
point is,
That's right.
if Joe Schmo, who you had a dispute with in a coffee shop one morning, not somebody you've done business with, you just got into a conversation and you managed to offend him one day, and he decides to post horrible things about you that are false, okay, not remotely true, and that goes viral, okay, and all the damage is done to you, you can probably sue Joe Schmo and get his 1942 convertible,
Maybe.
whatever.
Of course, if you look at the libel law,
But it may not make up for the
Well, that's the
damages.
point. They're not subject to the libel laws.
It doesn't matter if you get a judgment
That's what
for
Section
$1 million
230 does.
against Joe Schmo.
They are
It's-
protected from those libel laws.
boy, that's
They
over
can't-
my head, isn't it?
It's very complicated.
Very
issue.
complicated.
And I think reasonable people who sit down and look at it will find themselves coming down on all sides of the issue.
Because if we say we think we need to have freedom of speech, well, then doesn't
What does that mean?
the
Really?
Facebook guy, doesn't he have the freedom of
He can't
Well, but-
controlling
the
his
problem-
bulletin board?
Yes, but what we're getting at is it has now become a public utility almost.
That becomes
It's
the
the
difference.
size and the power that they wield.
Yeah, so should social media become a utility?
Well, does that mean it's
Then
it's
the
not
government.
owned by the government?
I think
Gets more
maybe maybe it should
And,
be.
and the problem is the speed with which
That's
social
true.
media operates. Okay,
But-
even our broadcast news and so forth is different now. It used to be that,
Once a day.
on Fridays you'd find politicians on both sides of the aisle. They would do things on Friday
Yeah.
because all weekend long that would be the topic of conversation,
Yeah.
and people would have days to think about it and then react to it on Monday and so forth. We don't have that now. Now things happen, and we react to it in 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Sometimes in 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, you can see
and there's no time to think
and
about
Sidney
it.
Powell's filing stuff on 12 o'clock on a Saturday night. You're thinking, how did that place
Well,
can't even be open?
One of
How's
our
she filing?
Twitter, for example, and Franklin probably finds examples on our side, but you'll see liberals will post an outrageous Twitter comment, and it'll turn out that it wasn't true.
Sure.
But when you go down in the bottom and you look at it, some of them will correct it, some
Yeah,
of them
yeah.
won't even correct it.
Yeah.
But even when they correct it, the original tweet will have 500,000 retweets.
That's right.
"Oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong" will have 2,500.
You
right.
remember in the first grade, your teacher lining the class up and making this little game?
Yeah, I
where
remember,
she whispered something in your ear, and you're supposed to whisper it to the
Yeah.
next person, and then you'd see what came out the other end.
Totally different.
Well, now you're talking about millions of people doing that.
So you almost,
So what are the odds of it being accurate at the end? Pretty slim.
it's pretty slim.
And that's not a partisan thing in the sense that it's Republicans or Democrats.
It's
or
human
conservatives.
nature. That's human
It's
nature.
human nature. It's human frailty.
But now,
the problem is we're all victims.
What's the date on the
Yeah.
quote that
That's true.
that a lie will go around the world before the truth has?
Yeah, something like
But
that.
what's the date of that? That's what 1800s, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So the problem's
Well, but it's
been there.
always been- it's
This
always
just
been the way.
amplifies
We
the problem.
can't solve. I almost want to take the stance we can't solve it. Let it happen.
Well, very few people though take the time. I shouldn't say this. Not that they don't take the time. It's they don't have the time to go to enough different sources to vet a particular comment.
Yeah.
I try pretty hard. I think John's, he spends a lot of time consuming media. I do too. Okay, I try really hard to get enough information to be sure that it was an accurate statement. I've been burned a time or two when
Because
it
you
had
didn't
all
read. You didn't read that
I didn't- not enough.
next article.
not enough. Check
But now
that.
I have more faith
It's
in the
really
American
hard. It's
people.
really- and it's not faith. It's not that. It's not an intentional thing. It's that if you got to work 12 hours today, and then you got to go home and talk to your kids for a little bit, and then get in bed and go work 12 hours tomorrow, you don't have time to vet all those
But the
things.
problem, Franklin,
And
is
they-
you don't
and
have
the
a good
platform-
answer.
And the platform that you're on is driving the content to you that they already think
They
you wanna
already
see.
think I want
But
to
you
read.
don't
it.
have
So
a
it's
good
really
answer.
a rigged game
Who
for
would
Yeah,
you
it is.
trust to vet it for them?
I didn't say that.
I know, but that's my
I didn't
point.
say I've got
I
an
don't know
answer.
that there is an
I don't
answer.
have the solution, but that doesn't mean we can't identify that it's a problem.
Well,
it is a problem.
From a conservative standpoint, and I don't even think Franklin could argue this, we are the consistent losers in these mistakes that keep happening. Just this past weekend, all of the Republican Senate fundraising websites were mistakenly taken down by Facebook. So the weekend before the biggest election of the Democrats and the conservatives' lives, the Republican candidates lost their ability to fundraise. Oh, we're sorry, it was just a mistake. My point is, I want it all left alone. I don't care if the whole ball game's open. You can do whatever you want. I think the president ought to have been allowed to tweet anything he wanted to tweet. I think Biden should have been allowed to tweet anything he wanted to tweet. And I trust the American people to listen to those two tweets, those two positions, and come out with an answer. And sometimes I'll win.
You
Sometimes
think people should have the? You're
I think they
you're
ought
back
have
to freedom of speech.
Yes, completely. But we don't get that right now. That's why Facebook and Twitter and Google are in trouble. They have algorithms that are, just like Franklin said, they are, on an individual basis, I think you sort of ask for it. If you Google for pornography, you're going to get a bunch of pornography pop-ups. You ought to have enough sense to be a little careful about what you actually put out there. But on an overall idea of us as a culture, I think information ought to be put out there, just dumped out, and the people ought to be able to decide.
And discern believe what they
Absolutely.
want to believe.
Right.
Here's what I'd say to you. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, okay? If If all the solicitations you get are from the candidate you like, you're not actually spending much time
But
trying
frankly,
to find out
you're
real
right.
information.
But there are-
no, hold on.
But there are
'Cause most
Democrats that will
people
do
are
that.
not.
There are
I
Republicans
said
that, but there's a
either.
bunch of people in the middle that will make the difference. And that's always
I'm
how
not
elections
sure that's
are tipped.
happening, though. I'm really not sure that's happening.
Well, right now,
You know,
the party designation, you all have actually lost membership. We're about 33 or 34 Democrat, about 32, 33 Republican, and we're about 31% independent.
And if you're a third party, good luck. You don't have a choice.
We're not set up for a third
well, it's
party.
because our system won't allow it.
I don't think we would actually
We have
want
something
that.
called single-member districts, which basically means you can be a third party and get 49.9% of the votes. And what do you get after the election? 0.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, there are parliamentary systems out there. If you get 49% of the vote, you get 49% of the seats in your legislature.
Yeah.
All right? So that you can actually grow a third party. Ours is set up so it didn't work. Ours has always been really a two-party system.
Because if I had to guess, we're all libertarians.
In a lot of ways.
You know, that's
In a lot of ways.
y'all aren't that much different.
We've got some pretty significant
Well, I'm-
differences.
What's the main difference?
Well, I tell you what, from my perspective
Yeah.
is, okay?
What's
This is
the main
this is
difference for
interesting.
you?
This is interesting because I think I'm a conservative, okay? But this is my definition of conservatism. When we identify an important societal problem, we ought to use the least amount of government possible to deal with that problem. That's my view of what a conservative is.
Why'd you vote for Joe Biden?
Because I think the Republican alternative is nothing like that.
So you think if
They think
if there's
frequently
a
the answer is to do nothing.
you think
And
if
I
there's
think
a
that that's
big if
wrong.
there's a big problem that affects everybody, let's say
COVID.
COVID, yeah, COVID, it
Sure.
affects everybody.
Sure.
But then you say we should use the least amount of government or the most.
Absolutely. The least amount of government necessary to do it. Okay?
So I can.
That's where you say you're a conservative, not
Sure.
not the
So
most
California
amount.
is completely
So-
wrong, and Florida is correct.
I don't know what you're.
California is completely locked down. Florida has opened back up and allowed people to
What
live
I
their
think
lives.
about that, John, is that there's a variable that's not being talked about. It applies to New York, for example. The density of population in an urban area is a big driving
Actually,
factor.
Florida has a higher population
Now,
than New York.
It does not have a density of population like New York City does. That's the reason.
Frankly,
New York
California
City's growing.
doesn't
And it's-
either.
New York's numbers weren't being driven all over the state. It was driven largely inside of New York City.
California doesn't
There's a
have
reason
that,
for
and it's the worst state in the
They
country
do
right now.
have. They have
no,
the,
they don't.
They have the largest city
It's
in the
spread
entire
out. Yes,
country.
but it's spread out all through the state. It's not just
It's
Los
higher
Angeles.
But all those people are coming in and out of Los Angeles. That's why it's an issue.
Georgia
They're
didn't
more
have those
transit
numbers, and
maybe.
Atlanta's just as dense.
It's just you know, it's just like
But now that's a disagreement about how the virus operates, not an argument about what you just said.
sure. That's,
You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
That's
But
an
there
argument
are,
about-
But there are things we could agree on.
So now, what do you
Here's
think
what's
the
interesting
difference?
about Franklin and I all through these years that we've done
It's
the
interesting is
radio
that
show.
you both wore sweaters.
On local,
See, you're not that much
on
different.
local issues, Franklin, I always found, was actually pretty conservative. One of the things I've bragged about for a long time is I don't think that government employees ought to be able to serve on government legislative bodies. They have a vested interest.
Vested interest.
Franklin helped write the city charter. The city charter doesn't allow that. City employees are not allowed to serve on the city council. I
Should
think that's
not
an
be.
excellent idea.
Excellent.
So on local issues, Franklin and I always found ourselves pretty agreeable that this was a waste of money. This wasn't transparent.
The big difference between John and I is that I think that what he advocates worked really, really well in a primarily agrarian society.
What's agrarian mean?
Farmland.
Agricultural.
People were out able to grow their own food.
Agrarian?
Agrarian.
Oh, agricultural. Yeah, okay.
I think that worked really well. I don't think when you put 10 million people together in 50 square miles, okay, that in that circumstance, everybody fends for himself completely works very well. You got to go to the grocery store. You got to have a job to make money to buy things at the grocery store. And I think the government has a role in creating the circumstance.
Government doesn't create
because
anything.
it's much more complicated.
Government takes.
But
All government does is take.
but let's still go back to your template. Anything that affects the whole,
Or a significant.
keep the government out of it as much as possible.
But that doesn't mean there's no role for
Here's the real problem.
No, but just keep them out as
the least
the least
necessary.
Here's the
necessary.
problem
To
that
solve.
Franklin's.
So that would be different from New York than it is in
But
Florida.
Franklin's missing something here.
Sure,
When you boil this down,
because they're
if you really boil this down, what he's talking about is the difference between a planned society and a market society. If you read The Road to Serfdom, he talks about that. Franklin believes that a bunch of bureaucrats in a Nashville or Washington, D.C. can make a better decision than millions of us can make.
I think that is it in a nutshell.
Why would I trust
think
a
I'll say-
bureaucrat to make a decision for me? They don't live like I do. They don't live where I do. Why should I trust them to make a decision for me?
So my friend Larry Presswood, he said that anything that affects everybody should be controlled by the government.
That's a totalitarian.
That's
nation.
his thing, and that's
totalitarian.
total. Is that what you're
I
saying?
don't think it should necessarily be controlled, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be influenced by.
That's
He used the
totalitarian,
example
too.
of World War II, and I thought it was a pretty good example of at least putting in a nutshell what he thought.
Yes, but that was extraordinary circumstances. It was actually unconstitutional and only allowed for in time of war.
And he said, "What's the difference between the COVID and the war?"
Well, what's the difference between global warming?
Well, we did.
Then you'd have to-
You know,
then you'd have to-
interestingly enough, we did all these things we're doing for COVID right now. You say there's nothing new under the sun. This exact same debate, exact same scenario happened with the Spanish flu in 1918.
Except that
Exact
we
same
thing.
quarantined the sick. We didn't quarantine the well.
But that goes against your argument.
By the
because
way,
that's more government.
I can pull up on
Yeah.
my phone video.
Now, there's no doubt that would be beneficial. There's no doubt. You couldn't make a serious argument.
I'm not
No,
sure.
it wouldn't be
Quarantine the
beneficial,
sick
Franklin.
would
People would be
good for
starving
the
to death.
society.
People would be killing themselves. They would be ODing, which they are doing now because of these lockdowns. So that's what bureaucracy does. Bureaucracy says, look, I've got this problem and I'm going to fix it. And by God, I may kill every damn one of you to keep you safe from that problem.
No, the bureaucracy would say we're going to find a way to get food to people while we keep them locked down that
So
way.
just shut up
But
and
the
do what the
libertarians
bureaucrats
would
tell you to
say,
do.
You don't have the right
You
to
don't
stop
have the
me
right.
from going and infecting my neighbor.
It's interesting that the libertarians still won't. See, I consider myself a libertarian. I'm more Republican in my financial dealings, but I'm more Democrat in my social stuff because I think everybody should do what they want to do. That's the reason we're here. If they
I mean, there are a
wanna-
lot of people who meet that description.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But now I am for police protection, education of the kids, and health care. I think national health care is
It's a
extremely
disaster. You will suffer equally. You're right. You'll have equality under that. It'll be an equality of suffering.
I think that the suffering is when I have a tenant that gets sick and can't pay the rent, then it still helps me. It's still for the
But it's your
overall
money.
good. And then you got to decide where is the line?
money? Government doesn't produce any money.
Well, I'd rather give the government $10 a month as give.
Your example was the police, though. That's fine. Most people never use the police.
No,
I
but-
go years without using
Well, I will
the
tell you.
Well,
but I pay for them.
Well, I think we do use them because when they're stopping them over here, it's
So
the
you're
same.
saying that you're paying for a societal benefit.
But that's also
And
in the
that I'm good with.
Constitution. The
All right, well, let's
Constitution
go to a different
requires us
direction.
to
How about the
provide
fire department
security.
then?
That's where you got to somewhere you got to draw the line.
The fire department has come to my house one time in my 57 years on the planet. Okay?
But if they hadn't have come to all the places, then your insurance would
but
be
you
up.
have to pay for that. When you buy insurance, what are you buying? You're spreading the risk around.
spreading the risk.
That's right.
So it is a benefit.
Yeah.
And I heard a guy say
Do you
one
need
day.
to eat?
Yeah, but I heard
Then
a
why
guy.
should you have to pay for your food? Because that's a need. You have to have that to survive. So let's let the government take care of that too.
there's some.
You need a car.
There's some.
Why should you have to buy a car? They should provide transportation.
That's
for you.
the argument. I heard somebody say the other day, said,
There's no end to this.
Tell the government to keep their hands off my Social Security.
But the point is, there's no end to this. Human nature is to aggregate power.
Nobody unless you die very quickly. Nobody only gets out of Social Security what they paid in, because you did not pay in as much as you got if you live 15, 20 years.
But that's a collapsing system, and we all know that. And you all are talking about increasing the amount of work to collapse the system.
But now let me ask you
this. Did you know you pay in about $130,000 to Medicare, and the average withdrawal is over $300,000?
Right.
That is a collapsing system.
Well, I'm not sure if the idea is bad, if just the management maybe is not.
That's part of it.
Well, you know what the management to make it better would be, Dee?
What?
It'll be like the system in Great Britain. Why do you think Charlie Gard, the little baby, wasn't allowed to leave the country when there were Italian doctors that were willing to treat him?
That's a terrible example.
It's not. They would not allow him to leave the country. Why?
I'm not familiar with that story.
It was a little baby. The British doctor said he's going to die. Sorry. The parents found a doctor in Italy that was willing to treat him and said, we're going to take him to Italy and see if the doctor can save him. The British government would not allow them to remove that baby from the country, and they sat there and watched that baby die. Now, the baby would have been coming out of their system. It would have actually been a cost savings to the British government, and they would have gone over to Italy. Why would they not allow it?
No clue.
Because if they had gone to Italy and Italy had miraculously successfully treated him, the British people would have realized that they have a sucky system. Right now, they are making it illegal, if you have the funds, to leave Britain for medical care.
Here's what John doesn't
How
tell
good a
here's what
system
John
is it if they
doesn't
have to
tell you.
lock you in to make you keep doing it?
Here's what John's not telling you. Lower incidence of heart disease, lower infant mortality.
That's lifestyle,
lower
Franklin. That
diabetes.
has nothing to do with the system.
All those, well, of course it has something to do with it, because if you have access to primary care, which a lot of people don't have here, you're able to get things that stop you from getting more severe health problems later. That's true. It's true.
How well
here.
does the VA
it's true.
work?
It's true. It's true in
VA is socialized medicine.
We're
How well does the VA work?
we're talking about the same thing. It's just where we put the line.
Agreed.
You know, y'all both drove in here on a socialized road.
That's right. That's right. And there's
If
not
it
a road,
wasn't for-
there's
I
not a
didn't-
road in Bradley
I know
County.
Obama said that
There
he
is
didn't build the roads. I knew what he was saying.
There's not a road in Bradley County that doesn't
There
have
is
a
a
filter.
I didn't build-
difference
I didn't build
between-
one of them.
There is a difference between saying there are some socialistic principles when we as a people say we're going to collect our money and build this or this or this,
That's what-
and saying we're going to
The
have an
difference-
overarching
the difference,
socialist government.
well, first of all, nobody's arguing for
Actually,
that. Anybody.
your party is.
No, you made a good point. Say that again.
There's a difference between having socialistic principles. We're going to agree that we'll pool our money to do this for the benefit of all, and saying we're going to be governed by an overarching socialist system. John Stossel said it about
You're way
libertarianism.
over my head. Say that one more time. I'm slow. Because it's making sense.
Do you know what the difference between socialism and communism is?
Sure.
Communism takes over and forces one controlling government by force.
One idea.
Socialism creeps in a little bit at a time. And so what Franklin's doing is he's saying this program and that program and that program are socialistic. Yeah, they are. But there's a difference in having these isolated programs with a mild socialist kind of principle and saying we're going to take the whole of government and make it socialist. There's a reason we're the most successful country in the world.
Well,
and it's because we're
the
not
most successful
socialist.
country in the world anymore.
Well, because
That's
we've
just not
lost,
true.
because
Yeah.
we've lost a lot of our
It isn't
competitive
true.
nature.
The standard of living's lower here than a lot of other
That is
developed countries.
absolutely.
You're like throwing two cats in a car.
Why do you think?
You heard that somewhere.
Why do you think people are trying to immigrate to the United States of America? If we're
Because
such
we're-
a terrible country,
Because we're freedom.
because we're free and you have the opportunity to be a success here.
But they're immigrating primarily from places with much lower standards of living than where they're coming from.
Why
So
aren't
you're
they
not
going to Great
You're not
Britain?
getting a tremendous number of people from Great
Italians.
Britain and Switzerland coming
And
here, or
Italians.
Denmark, where they're doing very well.
Or Switzerland. They're not coming over here and grow.
That's right.
All of the innovations, the medical innovations, they're all here. They had when Obama was pushing Obamacare, one of the premiers of one of the Canadian Ontario or something, was a big supporter of Obama and Obamacare. He got a heart condition. He flew to the United States to have his heart condition fixed. You need a heart cath. You can go up to Nova, and in a day or two, you can have a heart cath. The waiting list under the Canadian socialized medical system is 6 months for the heart cath. That's just the test.
Because capitalism doesn't rise. They don't have capitalism rising above. Is that what you're saying?
Here's the problem with
They
that.
offer it to everybody, and so everybody partakes whether
That's
they
right.
need it or not.
That's right.
And so what they do is they ration care. And that's what you will get under a socialized system. You'll get ration
But
care.
here's the problem. John's absolutely correct, 100% correct. If you can afford it, you can get the finest medical care in the world in the United States of America. But the problem is the number of people
All
who
right,
can actually
hang on.
afford that
I'm
is
glad
about
he brought that up.
5%.
I'm not sure if we as a society want that.
I didn't say we did.
To
I
where
didn't say
all
we
the
did.
rich can.
The question
no,
is
go over
this.
both.
Hold on.
All right.
It's like this. The question is this. And I'll compare it to the public schools. Okay? There's nothing that says if you can afford it, you can't send your child to the finest private school in the world. Okay? We're allowed to do that. But we've got a bare minimum that we provide to everybody.
Which is getting lower
And we
and
all
lower
believe,
and lower,
we
and that's
all,
what happens.
We all believe
Yeah.
that the society does better.
What's our
if
math
there's a
scores
minimum-
done? What's our math scores done the last 40 years, Matt Franklin?
I don't know.
They're
You know,
flatlined and decreased.
and let me say,
we have tripled the amount of money we spend, and our outcome has actually gone down.
Yeah, in the same period of
Tripled.
time. The same period of time, however, we've determined that we spend literally, I'm not making this up, 5 times as much money on a prisoner
That's
as
a
we
straw
do
argument.
on a
It has
student
nothing
in
to
a-
do
No,
with
it's
the
a
failures
perfectly-
of the
it's a-
public schools.
It's a choice
Nothing
of how
to
we
do with the
allocate
fail.
a
What he did
scarce
right there is
resource.
he did a straw argument. He switched arguments.
No, it's not.
The public
It's
schools,
a
we have
scarce
tripled
resource.
the.
Money is a scarce resource.
Look,
we agree on that.
education, the public school system is a socialized system.
Sure
We
it
have
is.
tripled the spending, and we have seen absolutely zero increase whatsoever.
You're saying what he's got's a good idea, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Socialism never works. It's never worked.
It's no different than it was in 1960.
Is that what
You
I'm
know
saying?
what the
What you're
independent? Do you know what the Independent Payment Advisory Board is? That was written by Rahm Emanuel's brother, Ezekiel Emanuel, who's a Harvard medical doctor, and he was basically the author of Obamacare. The Individual Payment Advisory Board decides where money is best spent. Now, you have to understand, Ezekiel Emanuel wrote a scientific paper setting a value per day to human life. And it was based on what you produced and how old you were. So here's a man who's set up a committee to decide where medical dollars ought to be spent. And his whole theory in his head is, how much are you worth to society? So if you're 65 and you need a liver, and that guy's 45 and he needs a liver, guess what? You don't get a liver, because you're not going to pay enough taxes to earn that back.
And you're saying that's
That's
socialism.
where socialized medicine goes.
Where is the most expensive hospital in East Tennessee?
Well, that wouldn't be many, would it?
Where is the
Memorial.
most expensive? No.
I have no clue.
It's about a mile and a half from here.
To Nova.
Yes. It's a private company. I'm not saying they can't do this.
A lot of
I will
Alright,
tell
and
you. I
what-
will tell you as somebody who on regularly, daily, looks at bills from Tenova Hospital. Okay, part of what I do. Okay, there is no place that costs more than Tenova Hospital.
hang on, let me-
Now, there's a reason for that. John will appreciate part of this
Where do people want
because
to
they
go?
have no competition here locally.
You're right.
And if you get taken there in an ambulance, which is where you're going to go most of the time, unless they don't think it will be profitable for them, in which case you may get sent to Chattanooga at that
All right,
point.
so let me piggyback off what he
Well-
just said. He's right, but here's an important thing to know. There's a thing called certificate of need. We would have already had an Erlanger branch here, and we probably would have had a Park Ridge or Memorial branch, but a bureaucratic committee, exactly what he's advocating for in Nashville, wouldn't allow them to build it. So the government interfered with the private market. Erlanger said this is a ripe market for us to move into, and the government wouldn't allow them to do it.
I remember that was a fight, wasn't it?
Well, let
remember
me
that
give you a
was in
perfect
the
example of
Banner
what he's
for-
talking about the rich. And you kind of bit into that because you looked at it on the front end and you said, well, that's not fair that the rich can afford something and the poor can't. You ever heard of LASIK surgery? Did you know LASIK surgery has never been covered by any insurance or any government program, ever? You know how much LASIK cost about 10 years ago? It's about $5,000 an eye. You know what it is now? $250 an eye.
Here's the contrast.
That's the private
Here's
market.
the contrast, though. Okay, maybe LASIK is available to wealthy people.
It's available to everybody now.
Let me finish. All right. The question is, would a pair of glasses be available to everybody?
Yeah, Warby Parker will send you 5 of them for
minimum?
$99.
A minimum need.
The question is, are there minimum things that the society ought to provide? Okay? Ought to provide.
That's what I'm saying.
No.
A floor.
No.
It's not a penthouse. Okay? It doesn't stop anybody else from going to the penthouse. Is there a minimal thing that we as a civilized society think our citizens ought
Why
to
aren't
have?
you working for minimum wage? Did you start out on minimum
we've
wage?
made a decision.
I think what we have is y'all are saying the exact
No,
same
we're
thing.
not.
It's just
We're
a matter of
saying-
where
no,
the
no, no,
line
no,
is.
no, no.
Well,
We're-
sure, it's where the line is.
Where the line is.
I'm telling you that the free market, if left alone, will fix this, just like it did with LASIK. There weren't enough rich people
Give
paying
us another example besides LASIK, because he debunked that with glasses. Because I see where you're going, and
Glasses
you're
and
making.
LASIK are two different things. You
Well, they both is.
you settle for glasses, but you could have LASIK. And my point was, what
okay.
happened was the wealthy got the procedure started because there were enough wealthy people able to pay a doctor to develop the procedure, develop
That's the
the
point.
technology.
You gotta.
But at some point, there weren't enough wealthy people to keep it going. So he's charging $5,000, and this guy's charging $5,000. This guy, they're both neither one doing
so
well
independent
enough. So he
competition
cuts his
caused
price to
the-
4.
Yeah.
This guy cuts his price to 3. That guy cuts his price
Well,
to
there's
10. And
examples where that doesn't work, though.
Before long, Joe Schmo, who works out here at a local manufacturing plant, can afford a $250
the free
LASIK
market
surgery.
gave us the opioid crisis. The free market was not going to adjust that until there was a reason why it was no longer good for them to do that. And it wasn't the free market that did that. It wasn't cheaper opioids that did it.
Now, are
It
you
was the
saying,
government
are you
stepping in
saying
and
the
saying no.
opioid crisis? Are you saying that the opioid
Look.
crisis would have been solved through capitalism?
No,
give me that one.
But here's
because I think maybe it would.
Well, here's the other problem with that. Opioids are a medication that affects your brain and affects the way you act. That's a completely different discussion. It's an addictive substance, and he's throwing that out like it's equal to having your eye permanently corrected.
No, it's
That's
just
what
an
I'm saying.
example
Where
that
you
the
want to
free
put
market?
That's
isn't
what I'm saying.
always
Where you
going
want to put
correct.
the
That's a
line.
law. That's just like saying the free market doesn't solve murder. There's the human condition that there are laws have to be passed. It
The
has
Food
nothing
and
to do
Drug
with market.
Administration is socialist. Aren't we all glad we have it?
And the road y'all drove in on.
Actually, I'm
Aren't
glad
we
you brought that up.
glad-
No, actually, we're not.
In the greater scheme of
because-
things, aren't we glad that we instead...
Yeah, wait a
would-
second.
would-
Hang on. Because, Franklin, previous to this year, the fastest development of a vaccine was over 4 years because of the FDA. It was only President Trump who intervened in the government bureaucracy and forced them to fast track it that we produced a vaccine in
Actually,
10 months.
You're exactly right.
Actually...
Private-public partnership.
Because they got the government out of the way.
That's a different thing from the free market, a private-public partnership. That's
partnership-
That's a hybrid between...
But Franklin,
got a
the
point. He got a
partnership
point.
was we're going to get them off
In
your
fact-
back.
In fact, the purely private one, Pfizer in this case, came in 1 week faster.
But they also
Then
got
the
fast tracked.
purely-
It was the
the
bureaucracy, Franklin.
partnership
The most
was
important
one
part of
week.
that was the
Yeah.
bureaucracy that President Trump waived the bureaucratic red tape.
And let's
Here's a
hope that
perfect
that works
example.
out. well.
Yeah, they said they got money, and then Trump said they didn't get no.
Some of them
hold on a
did, some
minute, hold
of
on a
them
minute.
didn't.
But that's in response to this incredible public emergency. Okay? Is that the way you think that drugs ought to be evaluated in general?
Are you saying the
That every
vaccine's
drug
not
that
safe?
administ-
Are
the-
you saying
the
the
companies
vaccine's
want-
not safe?
No, I didn't say that at all.
Then
I
what
said
difference
that-
does it make?
because they had an overwhelming
But it still
compulsion
happens safely.
to get it right,
It still
or
happens,
to screw their
but it
company for
still
the rest of the
happens
world.
safely.
That's not
It still
necessarily the
happens
case.
safely. I'll give you a perfect example.
Thalidomide.
The Food and Drug Administration. You heard where all of these distilleries shut down producing liquor and began producing hand sanitizer.
That's right, yeah.
This past month, the FDA sent them a $14,000 bill. Now, a lot of them donated their product, didn't even charge for it.
I remember
and the
that was a big
government
thing.
has now billed them and fined them for doing that.
Well, why-
That's the
Why
government.
did President,
That's
like that-
bureaucracy.
it's like
why did
that old
President Trump do that?
Well, he's trying to get them to stop. He's actually ordered them to stop and not enforce that.
It's like that
But
old.
that's the FDA
It's like
for
that
it.
old saying, "I'm with the government. I'm here to help."
Hell or hell.
Well, frequently it does, though. That's the thing.
I think that if we stayed, I think that either approach would be okay for a while. In other words, if you had 4 or 8 years doing your method, it'd be, if, in other words, if you went,
You can't get out of his method.
but if it went for a long way, it
You
destroys.
can't get out of
John's
it.
fear is
You
this.
can't- You cannot
Listen,
take power back from the
You
government.
can't use a better example than Social Security. Okay? You can't use a better example. Okay?
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about Social Security, you're going to talk about what it was intended.
The Republican
it was
Party, when
intended
Social
to be
Security was
supplemental
debated,
income
that's
for
true.
about 3
That's
years.
true, because guess what? We had tons of elderly people starving to death in their homes. That's just true. It's not something I'm making up. It's not good or bad. It just is.
We talking about.
So we made a decision that we were going
That
to
was
send
like
them
in the-
a floor pension. Well, guess what? Social Security is
But we
still not
weren't,
living high on
we
the
weren't
hog.
sending it to everyone. We were sending it
Yeah.
to those people. And then it got expanded, and
Sure
then
it
the
got
average
expanded. Sure it got
lifespan,
expanded.
instead of being
Sure it did.
65,
Sure it
became
did.
85.
Sure it did. Absolutely.
It's a collapsing
And that's a
system,
separate
too.
issue.
Yeah.
It's only collapsing because
So what
It's
you're saying
collapsing.
is his theory works.
No, it doesn't
What
work.
you're saying is it works if it doesn't progress.
It always progresses. There's no way for it not. I'll give you an
But it
example.
would work
I
if
could-
it didn't progress.
Do you think life would be?
Well, I could fly if gravity wasn't
But
around.
what I'm saying is his theory would work if it did not progress.
Here's the
Think of what
answer
you're
to
saying.
John's question.
I could run into a tree if it didn't crush into the car.
But I'm
and-
saying,
and kill me.
I'm saying at least acknowledge his theory would work if
No,
it did
his theory
progress.
won't work.
Here's
His theory
John's-
won't work because of human nature.
Here's the problem with John's argument.
If his theory would work if it weren't for human nature.
If it weren't for human nature.
Here's the problem with John's argument. Look me in the eye and tell me the world would be better if senior citizens didn't have Social Security. Forget whether it grows or not, whether it creeps large or not.
Look.
Would it be better if we didn't
Now,
have
what's your argument
I will
against
tell
that?
you, he just made my argument of why you can't ever get rid of anything.
I got that. I'm conceding that argument.
No, but that's your argument. That's
No,
what you
I'm
just stated.
conceding
But
what you just
frankly,
said.
the reason is because you have now got millions of people dependent on it.
I simply-
They didn't make any
going
other
back
plans.
to my
Do you know
argument,
what Social Security?
it's a real
Do you know
problem.
what Social Security
Going back to
returns
my
on
original
investment?
my original point was what? What my definition of conservatism is.
The least amount of
The
government.
least amount of
Okay. Would it be a better society if we didn't have it at all?
If we had never had it, I think it would.
And the
I
answer
think
is
I
we
think
had
you
never-
agreed. If it would, it would
we had
be
never
your
had it.
answer would be right if it did not progress.
But it always progresses.
Okay.
So how do you stop it from
So
progressing?
wait,
can't.
let's back up to what that means. Okay. You know what that means? It means needs testing Social Security, which, by the way, is something liberals proposed at one point, and Republicans
Actually,
staunchly
every time
opposed
we have
because they said,
taken money
"Oh, that's
out
not
of
fair."
Social Security,
Okay?
the Democrats have voted for it.
So the point
Every
is,
time
what
we
are you
taxed
wanting?
it, every
You can't
time
have
we've
it both
taken
ways.
money out of the trust fund, Democrats did every one of
said,
them.
Yeah, you got a
Outgrows.
point. You can't have it both ways. Which way do you want? You can't have it both ways. So you're saying let's take the other way.
You're not really suggesting
You
that there
can't,
aren't
no,
20
I'm telling
million
you,
people.
you can't take the other way. We have to fix it now because you can't take it away from people like that. Now, Paul Ryan introduced a way to maybe work on that, and they produced an ad of him rolling a little old lady off a cliff. That was
What
their
do you
response.
think of Paul Ryan first? Because that's going to help.
I think the math does not add up.
He doesn't even discuss the math.
No, he does discuss the math.
All right,
and
so-
I'm sorry. John and I disagree about this.
What's
point,
the
so I'm
return
pre-
on
I'm-
investment
I'm
on
pre- I'm
what has
pre-
Social Security delivered on investment? What's the average
Well,
return on
because it's
investment?
invested in U.S. Treasuries, not very much.
2%.
But it
you know
also,
what the stock
but that
market
mean-
has produced over that same time
but that
period?
means it's
Over
stable.
10%.
But does the government have to produce income? I mean, it's
It
not a
doesn't,
profit
that's right.
thing.
No,
It's
but
not-
the
it
point
doesn't,
here
that's
is what Paul Ryan said was, we're not going to touch anybody over age 55 because anybody at 55 has already set their path and they've got what they're counting on. So that will continue just like it is. But below age 55, now think about this. This is the Republican libertarian argument.
Yeah.
We're going to give anybody below 55 the option. We're not going to take anything away from you. If you want to keep your money in Social Security earning 2%, you can do that. But if you want to take a portion of your Social Security money that we withdraw from your check and you want to invest it in the stock market where it will get 8, 9, 10, 11%, we will allow you to do that. They made an ad of him rolling a little old lady in a wheelchair off of a cliff in response to that, instead of having a single discussion about it. So all he said was, if you're a young person and you say, I'm not going to invest my money for 2%, I can get a lot more than that in the stock market. I want to do my own retirement fund. We would allow you to do that.
Well, then that'd
be a disaster, wouldn't it? Everybody.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing to let people actually use their own money the way they see fit.
What's your goal here? Is your goal to maximize return, or is it to provide a floor?
To provide
If you
That's the answer.
but it's a collapsing system,
No,
Franklin.
it's not.
Not if it's a floor.
It's not.
Where's the money come from? Both
Here's-
of you.
here's where it's
Where's
not
the
coming
money come
from.
from?
I don't think people.
Here's where it's not
I don't
coming
think
from.
people should have the option to try to invest and make more.
You're not a libertarian at all.
Well, on something that the government gives you, it's supposed to be a floor.
The government
They're
doesn't
creating
give it to
a floor.
you. It's your money. They took it away from you to begin with.
I'll invest the other money, but not that money. That's my floor.
They're
That's
guaranteeing you
what.
All right, so
that's what's keeping
then let's
the rest
follow
of
this
it.
on up, Dee.
It doesn't
So
mean you
when
can't
Social
invest in
Security
your
was-
own.
You do all that. You
when
do all
Social-
that. We're just
when-
trying to protect the other person, not that
When
person.
Social Security started, you were going to draw at, what, 63 was, I think?
62 originally.
62. The average lifespan was 65.
That means we
so
can draw
they only
here, what, a couple
anticipated
years?
you to draw for 3 years on average. And it was, if you'll think about it, it was supplemental income. It wasn't meant to live on.
That's right.
So the standard has to be the same.
Yeah.
Well, now the average lifespan is 75, 76 years old. So instead of drawing for 3 years, which actuarially it was set up on, people are now drawing 15 and 20 years. It is a collapsing system. You all can sit here and talk about floors and fairness
It's
all you
only
want, but it
collapsing.
won't be a floor when nobody gets anything.
It's only collapsing
Because your party voted to
we have
withdraw
set an
money from the trust
artificial
fund.
point above which you don't pay anything into the system.
So in other words, what he's talking about there is progressive
That's the
taxation.
truth.
What he's talking about
That's
there
the truth.
is
Yeah,
socialism.
It's set up good, and it gets.
It's not
it
set up
gets
good. It was a
bastardized.
disaster all the way down the
The
line.
question is,
Social Security.
I'll
Yes.
accept John's argument. I'll accept it. He just has to answer this question. Is there a floor below which we should not allow senior citizens to fall? Period. And he would have to say no if he's being intellectually honest.
No, I've already admitted that you can't, as a human being, you have to make this system work now for at least the lower end. Because he's already got them dependent
That's
on
not
it.
the answer
That's
to
how
the question,
socialism
though.
works.
That's
I
not-
get you hooked. I'm a drug dealer. I get you hooked on this service, and then you can't do without it.
you
And
either
then,
believe it or you
if I
don't.
tell you to jump 3 feet every time I snap my finger, by God, you'll jump 3 feet because I'll take your benefit away from you.
Such as driving here on this road. If not, you ought to had to hatchet your way. You wouldn't have come, and we wouldn't be here.
Every road in Bradley County has a federal dollar in it. Every one of them. Not one was built with just local
So
money.
I'm saying you're right and you're right. It's just a matter of where you want to draw the line.
I don't disagree
Actually,
with
that's
that.
not entirely true either. There are developments he can tell you right
Once
and
it-
left
once it
where
gets-
they build the
Hold
road
on.
and
Now you
have
got
to
a
give
point
it to
there.
the
Hold on.
city.
You got a point there.
Yeah, but how many of those developments are asking the government to take over those roads, though, when they're done?
Well, they do, but it
And
wasn't.
then federal money's going in.
But it wasn't paid for. It was paid for
You
by
got
the
a point. I
developer.
develop subdivisions.
And
I
he
do it
pays for
under the
the road.
regulations. I give it over to the city, and they take it up.
But if you want to keep the road, you don't have to put any federal money in it. But you're not going to keep the road. You want the government to take it over. You want them to take over.
I want them to take it over.
That's right.
I want socialism.
Because you want them to keep it up for them.
Or socialism.
And it's not just, and a subdivision's a great example.
He's got a point there.
How long did it
Because
take?
it's not just
You got a
those
point
people
there.
in there who are paying to keep up that road. I'm paying to
How
keep
long
up.
did it take socialism to destroy the richest country in South America, Venezuela? How long?
Not long.
About 15 years.
Yeah.
But
They're
they
the
did
fifth
everything
largest
completely
oil. They're the
socialism.
fifth largest oil reserve
Nobody-
in the
So
So
world.
you're saying everything doesn't need to be socialist?
Of course not.
How do you think you get there?
Of course not.
When
Nobody's arguing
when
for
he
that.
got
It's
elected,
a straw man.
when he got elected, he didn't implement all of
I
that
feel
the
like
first
Steve
time.
Hickson.
He implemented this, and then once he kind of got hooked on that, he implemented the next one. That's
Shout
that's
out
the
to-
difference in
Shout out,
socialism.
say it out to who?
Shout out to Doughball.
Doughball, yeah, Doughball.
Socialism comes in an increment at a time, and you can't undo it.
I agree with that, and you agree with that.
I agree with that.
How do you stop
then
it?
You
How do you
can't.
stop
You
your
can't
good
stop
idea?
it.
Well, first of all, one of the big problems we have now, and this will send John's blood boiling, I know that in advance, okay? But we are at a historically tilted point where the balance is off here. There's no question.
How much taxes do the top 50% of the
Not
population
nearly
pay?
enough,
They pay
John.
all of it,
Not
Franklin.
nearly
The
enough.
bottom 50%
Not
don't
nearly
pay
enough.
any taxes at
We're
all.
at a
No
historically
taxes at
low
all.
point for
The
percentage.
bottom 50% pay zero taxes, Franklin. How the hell is that unfair?
D, we were just in
Now keep in mind, you're talking to a dumbass.
No, you're not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm talking to a very astute businessman.
Just a guy.
A very astute businessman.
Good, go ahead.
Here's what isn't talked about. At any given moment, there is a fixed amount of money in our society.
That's not true.
It is true.
That's not true.
Today, right now, this
Absolutely not
moment,
true.
there's this amount of money
That is
here.
absolutely not true.
And that amount of
That-
money
now-
is servicing our entire
This
society.
is important
Our
because
system.
Let me finish.
liberals
Let me-
believe
look
that
at
we're
it
a
like-
closed
It's a
system.
pie.
Do your thing,
It's a pie.
but think of it as an aquarium. You know, no,
Okay.
aquarium. What do they call those things?
A terrarium? Is that
Terrarium.
what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah. Do it.
Okay.
Do it like that. The
All
water.
the nutrition and the water and the nutrients in the soil is in this terrarium right now.
It's got a lid on it.
Yeah. Tomorrow there could be a different amount, but at this moment, this
There's
is
a
what's
lid
in.
on it.
Okay? And that amount has to take care of everybody living in the terrarium. The plants, the bugs, the salamanders, whatever.
Do you agree with that?
No,
It is true.
it's not true. Not when you're talking about money.
Okay.
Not when
It's
you're talking
true.
about money.
But
What he's telling you is, I don't know what you're worth, but whatever you're worth, you took it from someone else. You didn't make it. You didn't generate it. You didn't convince people that I have a service that you're willing to give me money for. You took some of their money. So what he's telling you is there is a fixed amount of dollars out there, and if you have more, it's because he has less. And that's what the Democrats and the liberals,
let's say
they base that on. It's based on envy and jealousy.
It's not that.
It
I
is.
don't
It's
expect-
envy and
I don't
jealousy.
expect to be Jeff Bezos. Okay? Bezos, whatever. I don't expect to be him. I don't expect to be Bill Gates. Okay? That's not what I'm talking about. But I can tell you that in the last 12 months, Jeff Bezos' income went up $150 billion.
Because
in
all
1
of the
year.
Democrats that he donated money to
That's right.
locked our economy down, and all of the money that would have been spent in our local bricks and mortars got shifted
So
to him.
my
So
question
he
is-
used the
so my
bureaucratic system
question-
to line his
So
pocket.
my
pretty
question-
smart, actually.
Okay.
Because the
And here's
Democrats
what
were
we
willing
know.
to do it for
And
him.
here's what we actually know. Jeff Bezos paid about $50 million in taxes last year. That's less on a percentage standpoint than the average teacher at Cleveland High School paid.
Do you know why? Because he built an Amazon out here that employs hundreds of people.
And got a tax credit.
His
But he still
people,
made it.
along with my
Yeah.
people, hang on, his people, along with my people, wrote the tax law. Jeff Bezos didn't do anything wrong. He didn't violate any law. If you don't like that, change the tax law.
Except
But
what
you know what happens? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did that with Jeff Bezos.
Except what
And you know what happened in her little Bronx neighborhood? The people who needed a job don't have a job now because he didn't build the Amazon plant
Except
there he was
what
going to
happened?
build.
You and I built the airports his planes flew out of. And you and I built the roads and the infrastructure going into his plant. out
Because
there.
you wanted him to come here and build
Maybe
a plant
I
to
did.
employ our people.
Maybe I did. Okay? But the point is, It's not like it was just the free market and by God, he got $150
You ever
billion
turned one
out of it.
domino
He
over
got
and
it because
expected
we
it to
helped him
stop
get
with
it.
that one domino? What he's doing here is he's pulling one individual point out and going, we can change that. You
Let me
can't
ask you this
change that. You
question.
change that,
Now-
it changes everything.
Dee, what would you think was the greatest period of growth in American history? What years would that be?
1776.
No, I'm talking about economically.
Oh, economically.
I don't mean.
Oh, 1957.
Okay. Guess what?
What?
The tax rate on the top people there was over 70%. I'm not suggesting we should have a 70% tax rate on them. My question is, does that mean we ought to have a 28% tax rate on them? Okay?
Trump
The
cut
greatest
taxes, the
period of-
economy
No, hold on.
exploded.
When Ronald Reagan was here, and after he cut taxes, the top tax rate was 36%.
And guess what happens? Here's something he's not going to tell you.
Should it be
Hang on.
28%?
Every time we have cut taxes, the total percentage of the total tax paid by the wealthy goes up. Every single time. Because what happens
Yes,
is...
that's right. Because there's not more income flowing
That's
to the
not
middle
true.
class.
But
It's
and
because
they're
the
not
pie
paying as
grows.
much
No,
tax.
it's because the pie grows.
But now to
No,
the
it's not.
competition point. How do we get people like Bezos off the couch and willing to do this? Because he's done a great
Well,
thing.
first
with
off,
Amazon.
Bezos, he's not telling you the whole
Because
picture.
it's a falsehood.
He's
what you're
talking
about to
about
say.
what that company paid. He's not talking about what they paid in local taxes. He's not talking about all the income on all the employees. Jeff Bezos generates hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes. So that is a false equivalency that he's giving you. Secondly,
Let's talk
the
about some real
total
numbers.
tax paid by the wealthy, the top 50% in the United States of income earners pay 100% of the tax.
And they've gotten a ever
But listen to what he's
share
telling
of
you.
that
He's telling you that the
terrarium.
bottom 50%
Terrarium.
who pay zero taxes, now they get all these benefits he's talking about. They get the roads, they get all the services, they pay nothing for it.
That's not
But
true.
he doesn't think that's fair
not
enough.
true.
So what's
They
fair,
pay
Franklin?
sales taxes,
What's
don't
fair?
they?
Should the top
Don't they? Yeah.
should the top 30% have to pay 100% of the taxes? Maybe the top 80%, maybe the
Nobody's
top
suggesting that
90%.
nobody gets out with no skin in
By the
game.
way, the
But-
way our economy
But
has
you have-
changed
we
in a
have to have
digital
ins-
economy,
we have-
these people will leave.
But we have to have
They will leave.
incentives for the rich people to spend their money.
There's no suggestion.
There's no incentive
We
to
have to
tax
have-
it.
There's
Yeah,
no
we have
proof.
to have incentive.
There's no proof whatsoever, zero proof, none, that Jeff Bezos would invest less if he paid 32% tax rate instead of 28.
Are you talking about
Does
his
that mean
personal
he
taxes,
really wouldn't
Franklin?
invest and try to make that money?
Here's
There's
the
no
problem,
evidence to
Franklin.
support that.
32% hits people like
Maybe.
Dee. It hits people like me and you. It doesn't
That's
just
an
hit
argument for a
them.
progressive tax rate that hits him harder.
Well, first off, keep in mind our founding fathers actually outlawed a progressive tax rate. It wasn't until the 13th Amendment was passed. They actually passed a progressive tax in the late 1800s. The Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. Basically, the Marxists started working on it, and they got enough envy and jealousy stirred up that they passed the 13th Amendment to allow a progressive tax rate. The first year, it was on the top 2%, and it was a 2% tax. In 7 years, it was on the top 40%, and it was a 90% tax. In 7 years, it went from 2% to 90%. That's what it does for us. Because once someone else is spending your money, there's no end to the wonderful things
You would
they can
agree
do.
with him if human nature didn't come into play.
But you're doing the same thing. I could fly if gravity wasn't
Here's
there.
So you're saying since they can't, it won't.
Well, that's an impossibility.
Yeah.
Human nature is what it is.
The top tax rate in 1925 was actually 90%.
Now
Again,
explain that.
It means
Because-
they
because-
took 90% of everything you made.
the fortune.
In
You
1925,
think that sounds fair?
I'm
well,
not saying
I
it's
would have
fair,
never,
and
I
I'm
would
not
have never,
suggesting-
I would have never believed that.
But guess what?
Not-
We had these vast fortunes being created. Okay.
Now say it again.
Vast fortunes.
1925. 1925.
The Rockefellers,
No, 29.
the
29.
Vanderbilts,
In
the
1929.
Mellons,
I'm making.
the Carnegies, massive fortunes being
In
taken.
1929. 1925. Right
Yeah.
before the Depression.
That's right. And
I'm
what-
making. I'm
Right before
making
the Depression.
right before the Depression. I'm making X amount of money, and I'm sending 95% to the
90.
government.
Yeah, 90%. And guess
Well,
what?
I would have thought
and guess
that-
what? They were still accumulating more money than they knew what to do with. And that's where really the problem comes in. When you reach a certain level.
Now, how did they go from Independence Day to 95%?
1913. They had passed the 13th Amendment.
Not the
Not
13th.
13th, sorry, 1913.
That abolished slavery.
20. Anyways, it allowed progressive taxation. The founders were opposed to progressive taxation because they understood human nature, and they said people will take more and more and more of other people's money.
Well, but what happened is, and this is just the facts, okay? It was an unregulated free market. And there comes a point where the market gets so skewed that it's not fair competition anymore.
And no one's arguing against
The
not
antitrust
regulating the
laws.
markets somewhat.
That's
There's
what
a
Larry
difference-
was saying.
those
The
are- but
pendulum
those-
swings
but
the
those
other
are two
way.
issues.
That's
There's a
right.
difference
That's
between
right.
regulating a market and taxing people.
Well-
Those are separate issues.
Well, but in that particular case, what they found was that the fortunes were so vast that there wasn't any money available for middle class people to invest in the economy, to grow their own businesses. It was all being sucked up there.
By taking 95%.
And those people then were doing.
And what he's telling you,
The
just like I
trust-
said,
Now say
with,
what you said a
but just
minute
like I
ago.
said with the road to serfdom, what he's telling you is the government believed that they could spend your money better than you could.
Hold on. So here's what happened.
And what does that do?
No,
That
say what you
empowers a
said
bunch of
before.
bureaucrats.
Say what you said before that. I can't remember what it was.
Well, it means
but
that-
it almost made sense.
Do
That's
you really
what-
think the government ought to take 90% of what you earn? Where's your incentive?
I don't know how that got to that.
Well,
Because the government guy can buy your vote.
Ask him that
The more
question.
money I've
Ask
got,
him
the
that
more
question.
policies I can do out, and the more I
Ask
can
him
buy
that
your
question.
vote.
Where's the incentive? Ask him that
And
question.
the answer to that question, and let me be clear, I'm not advocating a 90% tax.
Sure.
I'm not
But
advocating
where
70.
where
But
is
the-
this
But the
incentive?
answer is, it doesn't matter how much money you have coming in. Your incentive is to maximize how much you have. So there's always an incentive
There's
there.
not. He's wrong. Think about this, Dee. You started out.
Is
you
there
took,
always an
You
incentive?
took a lot of
If
risk.
I've got
didn't you?
$100 million, okay, and you took 90 million of it, okay, and I'm left with $10 million, are you telling me that I don't have an incentive to try to grow that 10 million?
I might just sit on the couch.
Well,
That's what
if you had
happens.
10 million,
You know,
you
I might
That's
just
what-
say.
that's what
But
happens.
actually, what really happens is you reach a certain point in wealth where you don't really start investing in the economy anymore. You just start speculating.
And
You
see,
just start
Franklin,
buying stocks.
and see, now think about that. What he's
Yeah.
about ready to
Yeah.
tell you is, I don't like what you're doing
No,
with
no,
your
no,
money,
no,
so I'm
no,
going to
no.
have a
I'm
government
not
committee
telling you
decide
that.
what to do with your
I'm not
money.
telling you that at all.
It's
I
all
am
about
simply
power.
saying,
It always
if
boils
you're
down to
talking
power.
about the economy and the idea that a rising tide raises all boats.
Like
Okay?
JF,
Yeah,
like
That's
JFK
the-
believed
an
in.
old
That's the
saying.
theory.
Like
That's the
JFK
theory,
believed in.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's the theory, okay? If only a few boats are rising in it,
But that's not true.
Because
and that
it's not
didn't
working.
happen. That didn't happen.
because at that point somebody has so much money that they no longer have the incentive to go out and build a new factory and try some new product and build a new business.
But they
from
do
ground
have the
floor. Why
incentive
would
to
they?
buy a yacht that employs the people in Michigan who build the yachts. Great example, I think it was Clinton that looked at the yacht industry in Michigan and they said, well, these people that are buying these, they're not paying enough taxes. And that's what he's doing right here. What he's telling you is it's not fair. It's all about envy and jealousy.
No, it's not
And it's
jealousy.
all about
It's
empowering.
not.
It is.
It's
It's
not.
empowering
Because
the
here's the
government.
problem with
Hang
this
on,
one.
let me finish.
Okay.
So they increased the taxes in Michigan on the yacht industry. Do you know what it did to the yacht industry? It collapsed. People lost their jobs. People lost their livelihoods. Ray McWhirter here in Tennessee, when he was governor, I was paying $35 for a license to be a dentist in the state of Tennessee. I don't know what the lawyers were, but the doctors were $35. It was $35. And Ray McWhirter actually...
McWhirter.
Ned.
You're
Ned
confusing
Ray.
me with Ray Blanton.
No,
Yeah.
it was Ned Ray McWhirter. That's his
Yeah,
middle
he was
name.
Ned.
Yeah.
That's his middle name. Anyway, Governor McWhirter.
Was his middle name Raymond?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, he actually went out and publicly sold it this way. He said, those rich doctors, those rich lawyers, those rich dentists, they're only paying $35 for a license fee, and that's not enough.
We pay $400.
We're going to raise their fee because they make too much money. And it's always like that. It's an envy and jealousy sell. And so he actually, and they do this all the time too, he did a static estimate. He said, well, if we go from 35 to 400, it'll bring in X number of extra dollars for the state to help all the poor people. You know what the total revenue to the state did? It dropped. It went down. And so people look at that and they go, well, how is that? Here's how. And this is what taxation does. My granddad, he still maintained the license. He was older. He didn't really want to practice, but he wanted to maintain that license. I had friends that graduated from dental school, and they were practicing in Georgia. But when you take the board, you're cleared in about 7 states. And so they said, well, I might want to move to Tennessee, so I'll maintain a license in Tennessee. It was worth $35 to do that. It wasn't worth $400. So when they raised the tax, all these guys went, fine, I'll just retire my license. And the total revenue actually went down.
Now that's not an example of just greed. That's an example of just the process.
Well, my point is, it was sold on the idea of greed.
Yeah.
But people have incentive, and so it has everything has a value and a worth. And it was worth $35 to maintain a license because I might go to Tennessee one day. Wasn't worth $400.
He's got a point.
Look at this circumstance. You like the terrarium, but the
Yeah.
pie chart's easier to understand. Okay?
Except with the pie. Well,
No,
with the,
How big's the
okay,
pie?
yeah.
The problem is, how big's the
Use
pie?
the Larry
Is it an
Press-
8-inch
the
pie?
Larry
Is it a
Presswood
10-inch pie?
No.
Is it a 20-inch
No,
pie?
it is the pie that
But-
has all the money in our economy today.
But a
you ex-
terrarium is just one encapsulation.
I get it. But hear me out for just a moment. Okay? Today, and you got to hear the whole thing, not just the start of it. Today, 1% of the population controls about 45% of the wealth in the whole.
All right, now wait a minute.
Let me finish.
There's a
No,
different.
no, what
well,
did I
hang
say?
on. There's a
What did I
difference.
say?
I know,
Let me
but
finish.
let me
No,
make
no,
one
let me
point.
finish,
There's a
because-
difference between wealth and income. So if you're going to go after wealth now, that's a whole different discussion.
Hold on.
This house is wealth.
All the money in our economy, you can call it wealth or income. It's the money that's circulating through our economy.
The available money.
The available money, 1% of it controls 45%. Okay? Now, let's go to the top 5%. 80% of the money. So 95% of the economy, of the people in our society, are subsisting, working, endeavoring, trying to do businesses, whatever.
Beating their
on
heads against the
20%
wall.
On 20% of the income in there.
But
Now,
that
hold
top
on.
5%
That doesn't mean that I
pays
think that
about
we ought to-
80% of all taxes paid. The top 5% pays about 80%
And
of all
are
taxes
still
paid.
managing.
Now how do you combat that? Because now
How
we're
much of
talking,
their money do you want to take, Franklin?
now
Well,
we're-
the answer to your question is their income now you're talking about, has grown exponentially over the last
But so
20
has
years.
everyone else's. So has everyone else's.
No, it has not.
It has,
That's what's
Franklin.
wrong with this
The
argument.
tax cut.
It's not
the
true.
tax cut
It's
benefited
not true.
over
It's not even remotely
almost
true.
90%
There's not
of.
a single
You're
fact
wrong.
that's right
He's
about that.
absolutely wrong about that.
It's not true. The fact.
One of you's gotta be right.
The fact is, the bottom 50% of income over the last 35 years has barely kept up with inflation. That's true.
Ask him
That's
who the
true.
top.
poor get poorer.
Ask him who the 400
Hold on,
richest
hold on.
people in America are.
And the top 1%'s income has gone up
You're right.
like 800%.
But the top 400 people, here's an
Wait, there's
important,
more. There's
here's an
more. I could
important
go on all
distinction.
day.
Here's what he's doing to you. He's talking about percentages. He's not talking about individual people.
Yeah, we
The
are.
top 400 people, income earners in America, is a different 400 people every year. Now, there's a couple when you look at Bill Gates and something like that, but the bulk of them are different people. And it's not because someone fell out of the top 400. It's because someone new came into the top 400.
They failed at 425.
They worked their way up.
We grow the most millionaires of any country in the world. 80% of all millionaires in the United States of America are first-generation millionaires.
Talking about millionaires.
First generation. That means they became millionaires in our system.
We aren't talking about millionaires. We're not even having a discussion.
He's going to talk about the billionaires who will fly to their home in the south of France and change their residence.
So we're talking about a certain percentage. If you're right and you're right, it's got to be a certain percentage that's correct.
If we went to the 1957, which you said was this huge period of economic growth in America.
Happy days.
Okay, happy days.
Yeah.
Okay, that 5% had 25% of the available revenue.
But the revenue, ask him
And
what
all
the revenue
other
did,
money
though.
was available.
You're right.
For the middle class.
But now stop for a second.
Hold on, let me finish. Okay, let me finish, because this is really a key difference between what we think. See, I think if you have a big, expansive middle class, it's possible for the people at the bottom to envision themselves making it into the middle class. But if you've got a shrinking middle class, you've got the middle class actually thinking that they're competing with the people below them, as opposed to the people who are getting more and more and more. What's crazy is the idea that if I'm middle class, that the people who are holding me back are the people who are getting by on 2% of the economy, rather than the people whose shares have gone from 25% to 55% in 35 years. Who am I really competing with? I'm competing with them for those scarce resources. I want there to be a free market. I want there to be social mobility. I want people to go from poor to middle class, and some people are going to fall out of the middle class and go to the poor.
How do you combat that? He's got a point.
They're going to do a bad job. We don't want everybody to have the same thing. But what I'm telling you right now is the playing field is greatly slanted.
Let me change something here.
Yeah.
He's talking about 1957, he's talking about now, and he's talking about percentage of the pie. But he's not telling you whether it's an 8-inch pie or a 10-inch pie or a 50-inch pie. Hang on, it's not a fixed amount. I'm going to give you the numbers. 1957, the real GDP in the United States of America, that's gross domestic product, that's everything we produce, in 1957 was 2.994. I guess that's trillions.
At that moment,
2.994, okay? So 2019, 19.092. So what he's talking about is the percentage of the pie, but he's not telling you that the pie went from a $2 trillion pie to a $19 trillion pie.
Good point.
That is true.
Everybody gained.
I don't disagree with
everybody.
that. No,
did you know
the
leading health affliction of the chronically poor in the United States of America is obesity? The leading health affliction of the chronically poor in the entire rest of the world is starvation.
And there's a reason for that.
Because our poor,
we make a lot of money.
The average poverty level home in America is twice the size of the average middle class flat in Europe. Our standard of living is so much higher than the rest of the world. And what he's playing on is greed and envy. He's saying, look what he's got. He's got more than you've got, and that's not fair.
I don't say that
if I'm a government person, by God, I'm going to go take some of that, and I'm going to give it to you.
But let me say this. If you're born today, and I'm using extreme examples, so I'm not saying this is it. I'm using extreme examples. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're born in a trailer park with a single mother.
Sure.
And you have to go to public schools. Mm-hmm. And you can't afford braces. And you get something and you can't get the proper care. Uh-huh. I don't care what you say. That guy can really not get where these other people were born with.
Sure.
He can't get there.
And we'll never get there.
He can't get
never going to.
Now, he could marry it, he could discover it, or invent it.
But here's the thing.
But he can't get there by working.
But here's the thing.
Do we agree with that? He can't get there by working overtime.
In general, on the average guy.
On the average, we're talking about.
Absolutely. But let me ask you this question. living in the same society, the same community, let's say Cleveland, Tennessee, should his public school in that neighborhood be as good as the public school on the other side of town?
Sure. It should be.
And it's not.
Because there's no competition.
That's where my libertarian
There's no
comes in.
competition. The average Catholic school actually spends less per pupil than the public schools do, and they have much higher test standards.
So I think if we could fix that problem, and I don't know how you fix it.
Nobody would ever suggest, or at least I wouldn't suggest that there's not a million ways to approach this problem. Okay? And that's why I said what my definition of conservatism is. There could be more than one way to bring a limited amount of government to a problem. Sometimes, though, the government has to be involved to solve the problem.
The overall problem.
Sure.
Do you know who Richard Montanez is? He was a janitor. He worked for Frito-Lay. He had a third grade education because they were an immigrant family, and he had to drop out of school and go to work. He had a learning disorder, and he was a janitor at Frito-Lay. But he read about Frito-Lay. He read everything he could read about the history of Frito-Lay. He studied their products. He swept the floor up every night. And the CEO of Frito-Lay, they were in trouble in the 80s. And he sent out an email, or at that time, I guess, a message board. And he said, any employee that has a suggestion, let me know. This janitor called his office and said, I'd like to speak to the president. And the president said, or the secretary said, he said, I'm at California. He said, oh, are you the California manager? He said, no. And said, I'm at such and such plant. And said, oh, are you the plant manager? He said, no, I'm a janitor. And she put him through, and he said, I've got an idea for you all I'd like to talk to you about. And to the credit of the CEO, he said, okay, you got 2 weeks, board will meet, bring your proposal. So he comes in, and he had little baggies that he had made up. And he said, I go out and I look at Frito-Lay products every day, and I look at them in the Spanish market. And he said, and they're on a rack, and right next to them are all these spices. And he said, you all don't have anything for this market. So I've made up a home concoction of spices, and he handed bags out that he had sealed with his iron, that he ironed his shirts with. And he passed it out. He's now a VP. He's worth millions of dollars. To the CEO's credit, he said, okay, he invented the spicy Cheetos product. Third grade education. That's what America does. And what Franklin is talking about will destroy that image in America. It will destroy that upward mobility in America. That guy had nothing going for him except his drive and his determination. And because of the open market, he was able to become a vice president of Frito-Lay and a multimillionaire.
But what about the guy that couldn't iron that thing together because he's working through
Think about what you're saying. This guy's a janitor, and he was able to do this. Some people, if you want to take what he's talking about, wait a minute, let's apply what he's talking about to professional sports. I don't think it's fair that I don't make multi-million dollars shooting a basketball through the hoop. Now, never mind that I don't have the skill of Kobe Bryant. Never mind that I don't have the height of Kobe Bryant. By God, that's not fair. So we need to make everybody equal.
Relate that to that.
I can relate to it. I don't know about Mr. Montez. Let me tell you about Franklin Chancey, because I can talk definitively about that.
You know him.
I do. I know my father was the janitor at Stewart School. And I know from age 2 to 4, I lived in the housing projects off of Lay Street over there, because the government helped pay our rent at that point. And I know that we got some of that government cheese that everybody makes fun of. And I know if there was a time, not every year, but there were times when we got welfare benefits. And I went to a public school. And when I got out of public school, I got Pell Grants because I qualified on an income basis to go to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And from that platform I got to earn a scholarship to take me on to law school at that point. But until that point, I wouldn't have been there without some assistance from the government. Now, it's turned out that's a pretty good deal for the government. I think I've repaid that.
Now he's going to
Gladly.
Now he's going to say that is because you've got tenacity.
Well, it's two things.
It's no. I may have had tenacity, and I'm not understating that. And I don't mean that people who have tenacity and drive aren't going to be rewarded.
Or intelligent.
But
Okay?
but here's the problem. There's a ton of people that don't have tenacity and drive.
But John's argument where it ultimately fails is that he can't. No, because if you take his argument to its logical conclusion, it's that we shouldn't have taxes.
I didn't say that.
No, it's the only logical
Didn't say that
conclusion.
at all.
You agree with some
Because if it's just the free market and the Ayn Rand model individual
See, that's what they do.
liberty,
There's
and
no
that's all that
reasonableness to
matters,
this argument.
And that's all that
I didn't
matters.
say I was against taxes. And then what he's doing is
Then he has to admit what you said.
Yes,
still,
what I'm saying.
We're just
but
arguing
it's
about
still
the
part
line.
of it's still part of the envy and jealousy argument. See, what he's saying is he doesn't want you to have anything. He wants to take everything away from you.
What I'm saying to you is, if the current level of taxation, the people at the top's share of the total pie is continuing to grow.
Yes, it always has.
That's the
it
wrong
always
level
will.
of taxation.
That's wrong. That's
All
wrong.
right, now what's the
But
level of
wait a minute,
taxation?
think about it for a minute. Wait a minute, let me stop him for a second. He's not talking about money anymore. He's talking about fairness. And that's where human
Fairness
emotion
would be that everybody
punishing
gets the
someone
same.
comes from.
I didn't
No,
say
Franklin,
that.
you did.
No,
Think
I
about
didn't.
what you just said. You said they're amassing too much. You didn't say it's
No.
not being spent in
No,
the right
I didn't say
place.
they're
You
amassing
didn't
too
say
much.
we need any
I
more.
said
You said they're
no,
amassing
no.
more and more and more.
No,
It's
no,
an envy
that's not
and
what I said
jealousy
at all,
position.
John. That's not what I said.
Yes, it is.
I said they're amassing a greater and
So
greater
what?
share
So
of
what?
a fixed
Everybody,
commodity.
no, it's not a fixed
So my
commodity.
question is,
that's
why-
where
hold
this
on,
whole
hold on,
thing
let me
falls
finish.
apart.
Why
I
should-
just gave you
hold
the
on,
GDP
hold on.
numbers.
Why
They have
should the-
tenfold increase.
Why should the 80% on the bottom, excuse me, why should the 95% on the bottom, subsisting on 20%, say that's the best system for them?
Because they want to do better, and that's what drives them. That's what fuels them.
When history shows the society as a whole grew much more dramatically when that number was higher than it is
That's not
currently.
true.
It
Now
is
argue
true.
that.
That's
argue
not
that.
true. We are the greatest country in the world. We have been from 1776,
expectancy has
and from
fallen in the last
1776 up to 1913, when we passed progressive taxation, we grew more than any country in the world because of
The middle class
because
is
of
smaller
Adam
now
Smith.
than it was 20 years ago.
And when in our society was there like a 10-year period when we had higher taxes that people were better off?
All through the 50s that you're talking about. Now, don't
Agree
get
with
me
that?
wrong. There were people being left out. If you were in the Appalachia or the Mississippi Delta, you weren't doing very well at all. But
What
the middle
progressive
class was growing.
what progressive
It was
taxation will do?
expanding.
Progressive taxation, if you take it to what he's talking about, will do exactly what it's done everywhere else. It will equalize the society. We will all be equally miserable. It has led to nothing but a decline. Venezuela destroyed themselves in a matter of 20 years.
Nobody
The doctors
suggested we
and
take
nurses
over
are
companies
leaving
and run them.
Venezuela, going into other countries and working as prostitutes to make ends meet. They have broken into the zoos and killed the zoo animals for food. They are buying bread now. A guy went into a bread shop. The bread owner had a scale. They didn't count the money. The guy set a stack of money that high on the scale, and the guy weighed the money to decide whether it was enough to buy a loaf of bread. They have 10,000% inflation in Venezuela. It was the most successful country in South America, one of the most successful in North and South America. It has the 5th largest oil reserve in the world, and they have been brought down to complete destruction because of socialism.
So you're saying his idea works in theory, but it doesn't work. I mean,
I'm
in
saying
theory,
his society leads to collapse. And
It's a good idea, but it leads to collapse.
It's a pie in the sky idea. What he's not telling you.
Crazy scenario, but why don't you look at Denmark or Switzerland? Or
Which Denmark actually pulled back from socialism in the 80s. They were pretty socialist in the 70s. They scaled almost all of it back.
No, they haven't.
That's why I'm saying somewhere in the middle is where
they are a market-driven society.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle.
More socialism than
what do you agree with socialism?
I agree with. Well, first off, one of the problems
Just answer it.
One of the problems is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment said that anything that wasn't expressly given as a power to the federal government was reserved for the states. Almost all of the socialist type programs that the liberals tried to push from the founding of the country up until around 1900 were actually ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court based on the 10th Amendment. Right around the time that the Marxists got in and we passed progressive taxation, the Supreme Court just walked away from the 10th Amendment. Now, what you would have had under the 10th Amendment is states, which are closer to the people, would have decided what you want to do. How much do you want to help the poor? How much do you want to collectivize things? And you would have 50 experiments, and we might have come up with an idea that that's a pretty good level. But the federal government started doing it. Once the Fed started doing it, then they started buying votes. So think about me. You listen to our argument. If you're the voter and you're saying that's a really good idea, and I say, not going to work, not constitutional, not fair, I'm not going to give you that. I'm not going to take money from someone else and give you this benefit. And he says, by God, that's just not fair. I'm going to take it from that guy. I'm going to give it to you. You're going to vote for him. That's exactly why the founders were scared to death of it. That's why we're not a democracy. We're a federal republic. We keep throwing the word democracy around. We're not a democracy.
We're a republic.
We're a federal republic. And the reason was the founders were terrified of the tyranny of the majority. So now for a minute, I told you that the top 50% pay almost all of the taxes. The bottom 50% pay virtually zero taxes. Now, I'm not talking about their sales tax on local issues, but federal
income tax.
Okay? So when the top 40% or 60% are paying, when the top 50% are paying 60% of the taxes, and the bottom, let's say the bottom, instead of being the bottom 50, now it's the bottom 60%, what's going to stop that? The bottom 60 are now the majority, and they can pass anything they want to pass. And the top 40 are the people with all the money. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to take every damn dime that the top 40% have.
Amazingly enough, that group of people lowered the income tax rates from 90% all the way down to 28%.
But let's not talk about just necessarily the tax amount. But
why don't we talk about a flat tax? A flat tax is fair.
What socialist programs help put money in my pocket that's not directly to me? Well, they help some people pay rent. They give it to me. But
they took the money from you to begin with. And they took a piece of it out.
Yeah, but if you're
to pay for the bureaucracy.
But if you're in Tennessee, every dollar you sent to Washington came back $1.16%.
Which isn't fair.
16%.
So I'm saying some socialist programs are a necessity if we're going to be a society.
That's right.
And what are they?
Well, first off, a lot of the socialist programs that you're talking about used to be took care of by the church and by charities.
Now we're talking about
and what the government is now doing is they are crowding churches and charities out.
You and
I, who used to say there's too many poor people in Cleveland, Tennessee, we're going to found the United Way and we're going to take care of those people. Now we go, well, hell, I'll let the government do it. I'm not attached to it. I'm not invested in it. Just let the government do it. And what happens with the government doing it? They have more and more control over our lives.
If you could stop the government's control.
You can't. Money is control.
Money is power. How do you stop your idea?
Tell me what you can't do today that you could do 10 years ago.
I will
20 years
I will
ago.
show you.
Tell me about all the horrible infringements.
I will show
on
you
your
a video
liberty.
right now.
No, I'm asking
from
him.
from this weekend.
Tell me what you
It's in
can't
Canada, but a whole probably 10 or 12 police officers burst into a private
can't name
residence
anything.
with 6 people who were celebrating and hauled them out and arrested them for, quote, violating the government edict.
Now that's an extreme version of what he's saying. This is where
Where the rubber hits the road, tell me one thing you can't do today that you could do 20 years ago while this overwhelming government takeover is going on.
Well, one.
I'll tell you one. You got to wear your seatbelt now.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you don't, you get a little tiny fine.
you can't smoke in a restaurant.
There you go. And the reason
But
you can't
that would go. You go back to
And the
that's
reason you-
capitalism,
and the
right?
The
reason-
thing
If I
about
want
a
to have,
restaurant,
and the
if I
reason
go in a
you can't
restaurant
is
and they're
because
allowing
you want-
everybody to smoke
then you're not
everywhere,
in there.
I quit going to that
so
restaurant.
you're saying capitalism
The market will
rise.
decide. The market will
But
decide.
it wasn't deciding that.
It was deciding
It wasn't.
it.
Government
It was
was
deciding
deciding
it to. I'll give you a perfect example: abortion. The reason we have fought over abortion for the last 50 years is because the government crammed a solution down our throat. What we were doing prior to that was each state, which again, closer to the people, each state was deciding how they were going to handle abortion. Some states were completely wide open. Some states were locked down. If you didn't like it, yeah, you might have to go to another state if you really wanted the abortion. But 50 experiments were going on, and somewhere along the line, like in the states where it was more liberal, the people were satisfied. In the states where it was more conservative, the people were satisfied. The federal government got involved. The Supreme Court made a decision, crammed it down our throats, and we have fought over it for the last 50 years. The Obergefell decision on gay marriage, that was actually, they were winning. The gay marriage people were winning actually fairly rapidly. State after state after state was going, okay, we're at least going to have civil unions. And what happened? The federal government got involved and crammed it down our throat, and so you had
Because the federal
tens or
government-
hundreds
you're
of-
saying they were going to civil unions
it would have
anyway.
settled. It would have settled itself, and when it
Good
settles,
point.
when it settles
Actually, yeah.
itself, people are happy.
Actually, the problem, with John is he's just hopped off of his horse in the middle of the stream and adopted the anti-libertarian view.
What?
Okay? Gay marriage, what's the government got to do with that?
That's what he was saying.
No,
I can
he
tell
said
you what
no,
the government's
but-
got. I will tell you what the government's
Because
got to
there
do.
were states saying you can't have it. That's not libertarian.
Franklin,
That's it's the opposite
The
of
point is,
libertarian.
we were 50 experiments. That's how our government
Guess
was
what
set
else?
up. That's
Abortion.
what a republic
Abortion's
is.
a great example. He talked about you could go to another state. Well, the federal government, largely by Republicans, by the way, passed a law saying that was illegal to go to another state and doing it.
That's fine. That's how.
Anti-libertarian.
Franklin, then those
I only
people
say
can
this
be.
because
Then the
I don't
market
care
can take
what-
those people out of
I don't care what
office.
his position is. John is picking and choosing
No, he's not.
when he's a libertarian and when he's not.
Well, I'm not. I didn't say I was a complete
I'm at
libertarian.
least saying I think the government ought to be involved in a lot of
No,
things.
I think the people ought to
Just
be
not more
involved.
than
The
you.
people should be able to decide. And the people, through their elected representatives at the state level, were deciding. But my overarching point about this is people are satisfied, even if I lose. If I lose through what I consider I didn't elect enough people that believed like I did to the state legislature and I lost, I accept it. When 9 guys, or men and women on the Supreme Court, cram it down my throat, I don't accept it. So it doesn't engender goodwill. It's government forcing something on all of us instead of allowing us in the marketplace of ideas to work it out.
So let me ask you this. You agree that some taxes are okay.
Yeah, I would like to see a flat tax.
What are they? That's what I'm for the flat tax.
And Franklin's going to say with the poor, look,
I'm
almost
actually-
all the flat taxes that have been proposed, there was a bottom income level that paid nothing. So I'm not saying that, the guy that's making $10,000 a year has to pay.
Then, is it?
It's a modified flat tax.
Yeah, a Buchanan flat tax, right? I'm really for kind of a tax, just a sales tax, not an income. If you don't want to pay the tax, don't pay.
That's very regressive.
That does hit poor people heavier. But now
How you figure? Everybody's gotta eat.
There are modifications put
That's
forward
right.
on that.
It's a much larger share of somebody's income at the bottom than it is for somebody at the top.
Well, actually, there's a whole
it's
argument
a tiny
about
little
that.
fraction of a millionaire.
It's how we decide that.
And it may be 35%.
They've actually changed the way they figured the poverty level.
But
and
if
the
I don't want to
percentage.
work harder to make more money to
You're
buy a
assuming
boat, then I
you're
don't.
assuming that's an option.
It
for you,
is.
though. It's not always an option.
It's not always.
It's
That's
like
how the
the
Frito-Lay guy ends up a millionaire.
The unemployment rate has fallen pretty consistently over the last 12 years. It has gone down there. But the reality is the majority of that growth or falling of the unemployment rate is very bottom level jobs. All right? It's not something that you can improve your life.
Do you know how long the average
But it's the
person
reality.
earns minimum wage? In Walmart, for example. Do you know what the average time period to earn minimum wage
Well,
at
not
Walmart
at all,
is?
since they're
6
not paying
months.
minimum wage
6
anymore.
months. 6 months. So the whole point of minimum wage is it's not supposed to. One, it in the past has been majority teenagers who are gaining work experience, and you don't want them to be able to live
That
minimally
is
on minimum
correct.
wage. You want them to
But
go,
that's
by
not
God, I
what it
want
is
to earn
now.
more.
But that's not how
And so
we
when you
lower
rate
the unemployment rate.
$15 minimum wage, every single city and state it was done in, total employment dropped, especially among the young people.
But what if we agree that 20% taxes, income taxes, is the best, then flat tax.
Well,
What's
first
that
off,
go to?
When he's talking about 39%, the billionaires, they don't pay 39%.
No, it's a
because the
stepped-up
tax
thing.
code. No, my
'Cause we've
point is
given them too
the
many
tax
exemptions.
code is so. What the nice thing
Yeah,
about
yeah,
the
yeah.
nice
That's
thing
how
about a
Jeff
flat tax
Bezos
was
actually
a
paid
flat
and
tax.
tax
A
credit.
flat tax has no exemptions if you're really doing
That's
it.
what I'm saying.
And so if by God, if you make $1 billion, you're going to pay 20% of $1
Now,
billion.
where does that money go in your
It would go to the
world?
federal government.
For what?
Well, that's a whole different discussion of what our priorities are.
I think it's the same
That's where
discussion.
the line's being
I think
drawn.
it's the same discussion.
It's-
Well,
What's
first
it
off,
supposed to
It's
pay?
like here's where I get crossways with John ultimately. Okay? He's a big proponent of the red states. Okay? Across the board, the red states get more money back than they send up there.
Then I'll
The
fix
blue
that.
states get less than they're sending to the federal government.
Well, that's not
And
entirely
he
true.
uses that as his example of, how great
that's
things
not
are
true
down
either.
here. Well, if the government took those money away, you know what would have to happen? Either the services would be cut back dramatically, or your local taxes
so
would
let me
have
tell
to
you
go
why
up.
that's not true. That's not true.
What are the
The blue states, and that's what they
Are
got so
paying
upset
for the
about
red
under the
states.
tax thing.
They're
The
paying
blue
for
states
Tennessee.
have much, much higher state and local taxes, and they were able to deduct that off their federal taxes. And so they were not paying as much federal taxes because they were paying these state taxes.
Every dollar we send to Washington, Tennessee gets $1.
Because we don't have the high local taxes to deduct.
In
The New
Mississippi,
Yorks and the Californias,
it's $1.19
the
comes
New York
back.
and the Californias deduct their local taxes and state taxes.
The poorest
But
counties
in
the
your
world.
perfect world, in your scenario of 20% is flat tax is reasonable, what does that money go toward?
Well, that's another discussion. For example, you could wipe out, we talk about the deficit, you can wipe out every dollar of discretionary spending, which are all the budgets
That's right.
that we
So-
talk about,
so-
and you still have a deficit.
That's right.
It's Medicare, it's Medicaid, and it's Social Security.
And defense.
But I could argue all of
No,
those
you
are.
can wipe defense out, and you still have a deficit.
But let's say if you want police protection, national defense.
Well, first off, police
Ca-
protection is local, for the most part.
But it's not all local.
Well, it's the
Some
bulk
of it's
of it's
coming
local.
from the federal government.
They get some grants.
Well, we got
and
the
things.
FBI.
No.
I mean, we got
Our
we got-
police department here gets grants from the federal
They
government.
get grants, but they're still locally funded.
They've got all kinds
But,
of
let,
equipment.
but let's say
there
what
from the federal government.
what would be the categories?
Well, the original category, to
protection?
be honest, was interstate commerce, which would be some of the interstates, the roads, and the military. That was about it.
And not police.
No.
Would you add
Police was a local issue.
Would you add police today?
I would leave it as a local issue.
Would you add medical?
That was well. Here's the problem with medical. I have to file my taxes every year.
You're
so
a-
why shouldn't the government provide me with an accountant?
You're a true-
Franklin. I have to go to court. Why should I? If I have a bankruptcy, why should I have to pay him?
You're a
to do my bankruptcy?
You're a true Ron Paul. That's what he's.
I'm just saying that there's no end to where you're going with this because everybody
that's
can
right,
say I
there's
have to
no
have
end.
everything.
But the problem
Yeah.
I have with the Republican Party in particular is it does not take a lot of moral courage to say I'm for lower taxes. It takes a lot of moral courage to say, here's what I would cut out
I'm not
to
disagreeing.
lower your
Here's the
taxes.
thing,
No, hold on.
I'm not
and
disagreeing
that never
with you.
happens.
Could you go, in your perfect world, could you really go to just those two things?
You can't get rid of that's what I'm telling you with the
National defense.
but
we all agree we need that,
you're
right?
You're doing the same thing you did before.
Making a real
You
choice.
can't. No, my argument on all these programs was once they're established. That's why Obamacare was such a disaster. Obama knew that if he ever got it passed, you couldn't get rid of it. And so you can ask me that question all you want, but you can't take stuff away from people once they've gotten used to it. They'll revolt. And that's why you've got Republicans, and I agree with him, they're not holding their line and actually cutting services like they ought to do, although Paul Ryan tried. But one of the main reasons they're not doing it is the media immediately goes on the Democrat side and said, they're going to take all this away from you and we get voted out of office.
Don't you think in society we need a Paul Ryan and an AOC?
They know,
You know what I'm saying? We need
the
them.
Democrats
Of course
know
we do.
without a doubt.
To argue it.
They know without a doubt that Medicare is collapsing. They know that Social Security is collapsing. They know all of these programs are, and when they collapse,
You believe they're collapsing?
It's an easy fix.
Here's the thing:
What's
when they
the fix?
collapse,
What's the fix?
nobody gets anything. Everybody suffers when they collapse.
Which goes back to your point. So what's your
It's an easy fix.
what's the fix?
Okay, first of all, John made a point earlier that's valid. We do live longer now.
That was part of Paul Ryan's program too. He was going to extend it 2 years.
I personally would support increasing the retirement
Well, you
age.
should have
But
told
now-
your
but
party
now-
not to run an ad of him
But now
running
this
an old
point,
lady off
let's say that I
Because I
approach.
wouldn't support your solution.
But
Hold
now-
on.
but now if
I
I-
would also say that the cap right now on who pays into it is not the right place where it should be. People who make more than $155,000 ought to pay some more into the system.
Into Social Security?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the reason why. It's not a pension system. It's a societal choice that there's a floor we shouldn't let our
For
elderly
who?
systems fall below.
For who? Because it started with the people who were identified.
Senior citizens.
Everybody's
Hold
a
on,
senior
hold on.
citizen.
Now, if you want to go to the next level, John, and needs test it,
Why don't we go
Then
back to
okay.
what it was when it started? Because that's what it was when it
but
started.
that's a more liberal view than I've taken.
Well, Franklin, I'd like to get rid of it, but we can't
Well, you're
now.
not going to get rid of it, John.
No, I know, because you all have got the addicts are hooked. You gave them the drugs and they're hooked.
To get rid of it, it would be
You
immoral.
gave them the drugs and they're hooked, and now they have to pay.
God forbid somebody getting $900 a month. Oh my God, they're just a drug-dependent addict on the government.
Franklin, we're so
As
many
if they had an
generations.
option.
We're
What
so
was
many.
that
No,
option?
they don't have an option now
Was there
because we're
some
so many
pension plan I
generations
don't
down
know
the road.
about for people who worked at a convenience store?
Look, it's real simple.
There wasn't one.
If
Yeah,
you're
they don't have a chance.
if you're
They
a
have a
kid,
chance.
D, and Franklin feeds you every day, and I want to teach you how to farm and how to hunt. Let's go back to agrarian. I want to teach you how to farm and how to hunt.
Go to the horse. You can lead a horse. You
Or
teach
wait
a man
on.
to fish.
So I
but-
want to teach you. He wants to feed you, and he feeds you, and he feeds you for 50, 60 years. At 60 years old, can I teach you how to hunt? Can I teach you how to farm? You're too damned old. You're too far down
But
that
I'm the
road.
one who's
And that's what he's
advocating
done.
doing
So
my
now,
teaching.
I know, but now what he does is he says, you know what?
How do you teach? How do you like that movie? Remember that movie? Greed is good.
Sure.
What was that movie? Remember that movie?
Wall Street.
Wall Street. He said greed is good. That's what you're saying. Is greed is good and drive is good, and you're saying his system
Too much-
takes away
but
that
his
takes that away.
His
Too much
system
greed is
imprisons
bad.
people.
It makes people
It
dependent.
imprisons people. You
And
talking
you're
about?
saying no, it lifts them up.
Too
No,
much
it doesn't
greed
lift
is
them
bad.
up.
But you're saying you're saying his system.
I'm saying that I made a different choice. My choice is that it's not better for our society as a whole for it to simply be every man for himself, no matter
It's
what
never
the
been every
consequences.
man for himself. See, he's doing another straw
No,
argument. It's never
because-
been that.
Because you, but
Never
John,
been that.
But John, here's the
Never.
problem. The problem is, you either have to ride that horse to the finish line, or say, no, I'm getting off before
What did the Rockefellers and all the Barons, what did the Barons do?
He and I are agreeing on this point. We disagree about where to draw the line. But you don't get to say it's all bad.
I didn't say that.
Actually, you said that too. Because you agreed with some things, but not
the
list.
Well, for example, Bill Clinton had enough sense.
Explicitly where you're going to draw the line.
I'm going to tell you, Bill Clinton had enough sense to go along with Newt Gingrich, and they put work requirements onto welfare. Millions of people came off of welfare.
Bill Clinton was a good president.
Bill Clinton was not a good president, but he went along with Newt Gingrich. Once Newt Gingrich took over, Bill Clinton had enough sense to compromise.
The old saying, would you have a problem with the peace or the prosperity?
All right. Well, we can talk about the peace where he destroyed the military, and that's what brought on 9/11. There's all kinds of things here. But my point here was, when the Democrats got back in control in the mid-2000s, they started, and Obama was the worst, they started taking the work requirement off of welfare. You know, in my lifetime, in the 70s and the 80s, you had to work, and for food stamps, for example, you had to earn $20. And you took your $20 down to the office, and you gave them the $20, and they gave you $100 in food stamps. Well, then the Democrats start going, well, you know what? It's not fair for them to have to come down to the office. So we'll just mail it to them. They'll pay their $20 and we'll mail them the $100. Then after they got that, and this is what I'm talking about, it incrementally eats you alive. They said, it's not fair for them to have to pay $20. We'll just send them the $80 and it's a wash. The difference was the $20 gave them some buy-in. It gave them some responsibility for themselves. Once they just started giving them the money flat, you don't know how many times in Memphis when I was in dental school, I had a little girl come up behind me and I had my food, and she startled me. She went, I'll pay for your food. And I went, what are you talking about? She said, I'll pay for your food. I said, I don't understand. And she held up beer and pizza and said, I'll pay for your food. And I had a lot more food than the cost of her beer and pizza. And she said, you buy my beer and pizza. And she held out her food stamps. That's what it does to people. It destroys their initiative. They don't want to get any better.
It kills the drive.
It kills the drive. And so I'm not arguing hang on, before you start, I'm not arguing about destroying all of it. I'm telling you it is incredibly important how you do this. And the problem with Republicans and Democrats is there's a whole other component here, and it's buying people's votes. And so some of these decisions are hard decisions. I think it was probably a hard decision for Bill Clinton to agree to instate a work requirement, but it was the right thing to do, and it was successful. Mm-hmm. But it became so much easier to turn around and go, we can pick up 2% more of the vote if we do away with this work requirement. And that's what happened.
What if I told you that 80% of the people on welfare are on it for a short period of time and come off of it?
I don't know the statistics.
It's true. It's true. It is true.
It gives
now, there is a group of people who are dependent upon it and have been on it for a long period of time. And I assume that that's the people that he's talking about.
Well, but it's not only that. Hang on, I'm going to agree with you a little bit.
My question is, why isn't the conversation about how to address that 20% as opposed to let's get rid of it all? The 80% of people are using it
I said
as
put a work
bridge.
requirement in. See, that's
true.
Listen to what he just did. I didn't say get rid of it. I said put a work requirement in.
No, that's not what
Put a work requirement in.
The 80% of it are doing just that already.
Well, here's another problem.
Okay.
This is where you get into centralized planning.
But he did clarify.
Hang on. There's more to
but
this.
They don't talk about.
This is where you get into.
About the fact that 80% of the people are using it appropriately.
This is where you get into centralized planning. This happens all the time, and I run into this in the office.
And guess what? Now, hold on, let me finish. Because
you've been finishing for about 30 minutes.
If you ask the average person on the street, what percentage of people are on welfare long term, I promise you they will say a lot more than that 20%.
You think it's only 20%?
Oh, it is. It is. Because the numbers show people go on to it.
You think it's actually simply a bridge for the vast majority.
Let me throw one wrench in that.
Most people use it as a lifeline.
What is 20%?
Most people use
What is 20%?
Yeah.
It's about 65 million people. 65 million people.
No. 20% of people are on it long term. 25%, 20% of welfare recipients,
Which
not
are
20%
about a third of the population.
20% of the
Franklin.
recipients are what?
It's millions and
Use it as a
millions and
bridge or
millions
not?
of people.
25% of that 65.
It's millions
So you're
and
talking about 15
millions
million.
and millions
Okay,
of
but
people,
that's
and
a
it's
lot of people.
multiple generations.
That's a lot of people,
It
but-
destroys entire generations because it's not structured right. Now, wait a minute. Let me finish what I wasn't allowed to finish. There are tons of people that will work right up to the limit, and then they'll quit. Or they'll not take that promotion because the structure, because of the centralized planners said, well, if you make over this amount, we cut your benefit. Well, they want to make more, but they can't afford to lose their benefit. So we're not even smart enough as centralized planners to put a step program in to way, if you earn this much more, we'll decrease it slightly. But we still give you the incentive to earn more. Right now it's set up that if you earn too much, you lose it. So a lot of them just go, screw it.
So have that discussion.
Have that discussion.
Well, you can't because when
Yeah, you
Paul Ryan
can.
puts that kind of
That's
idea
not
forward,
what he's
his people ran an ad showing him running a little old lady off a cliff, which completely shut the conversation down because it was too valuable politically.
But that's not his theory. That's just his.
It's his
people,
party.
his
It's
party.
too valuable.
But we're talking about his theory.
about-
But now
that was
you're
about
getting
Social
back into the
Security.
But
politics.
we're talking
of it.
about your theory. Would that be your theory to step off?
Sure, you give an incentive to work your way off of it. But
Well,
you do, but
then
you do some
ask your
common
party to support it because they never have.
But listen. You can get rid of everything if you choose
That's where
to.
you go back to the least amount of government to
Sure, you
solve
can
the
get rid of
problem.
everything if you want to. I mean, we subsidize lodgings for the poor. All right, we do that. There's nothing that says we have to do
Look,
that, but we do.
Donald Trump went and campaigned in Iowa, and he campaigned on tariffs and some of that. And one of the Iowa farmers got up and he said, "You're going to hurt me with this, but I think it's the right thing to do." We had one little, in the stimulus thing back in 2009, we had one little community that was going to get money for a bridge. And they voted, the local community voted and said, we don't really need this money for the bridge. We're going to send this money back. The problem is it's too damned hard to do that. The money is huge. The political value is huge. The more you empower government, the more of this you're going to get. It's a losing proposition unless you get, for example, Jimmy Carter started the Department of Transport or of Energy in the 70s because of the oil embargo. It wasn't supposed to be around this long, but by God, it's a permanent fixture, and it's grown and grown and grown.
And don't even need it
We
now.
probably ought to get rid of the Department of Education. Lamar Alexander mentioned it, and then he figured out it was going to tank a presidential idea, and so he dropped it. The government never recedes, and the more power you give to them, the more power they take and the more control they take. And this COVID thing that's happened, you are seeing governments just run. You've got the mayor or governor of New Mexico is fining churches $10,000 because they had Christmas services. $10,000 fine to a church. Now that same state opened casinos and brothels, but closed churches. Mm-hmm. Now you tell me the logic of that. There's no logic, there's just power. And it's the same argument with marijuana. We know marijuana legalization. Now, look, I know I've lost that argument. We're going to legalize it. But it's all about money. Even conservative, Republican states are going, hey, it'll bring in X amount of dollars, so by God, let's do it.
Well,
it's all about money, it's all about power.
What do you think is too much government control or subsidies? Is there a point where you'd say, hey,
of course there would be.
Where would that point be?
Well, in what
the
area?
sugar industry, the corn industry, all of those are subsidized.
I mean, here's where I get crossways. I can give you a million examples where the Republican Party supports things that are anything but free markets.
I don't disagree.
They just pick and choose the ones they like.
Well, that's true.
Okay? All right? Subsidies is a good example on that. All right? We've been doing that for years.
But
That's
again,
not just Democrats and Republicans.
You're right. He's absolutely right. But here's the point of that. Why does that happen? Because they're buying votes. That's the problem with all of this.
Well, what's
That's
the
the problem with big government.
What's the alternative?
The bigger government gets, the more votes people are trying to buy. The more services they have to buy votes
You
with.
almost can't stop that, can you?
What's
the
the
big
al-
government
You have
get
to
bigger.
have enough gumption as a culture to say, we're going to stop this. Government's too big. It's too
And
powerful.
I don't know if that could ever happen because it just keeps moving.
Well, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time.
I mean,
That's socialism. And he can tell you all he wants about how we have a little bit of if the Democrat, for example, if they win Georgia, you will see the march to more and more socialistic type government advance very rapidly.
Could that get to extreme where you wouldn't agree with it?
Of course it could.
Give me one example.
Well, for example, let me give you.
Say the government came in and said, you can't charge but this amount of money for
We do that all the time already.
For your law. Well, say you're a criminal.
We do that on loans now. There are limits on how much interest you can charge on loans.
Usury fees.
We're really we've actually circled back to the discussion about liability protection.
That's right.
Let's look at this is what I do for a living, okay? And start with the premise that it's about where you draw the line, okay? We don't have exploding Ford Pintos now. We don't have it because the market changed. We had it because it was cost prohibitive to make Ford Pintos that exploded when you got hit.
Back to his point,
Okay.
Capitalism. They decided
It wasn't the market. Enough people sued them, and they corrected it.
But that's a market of influence on it.
So that was his system working.
Yes.
Oh no, because what has been that is, oh no, we need to cap that. We're not going to let people decide how much liability someone should have. We're going to cap that.
The reason for that again is human nature.
We're not going to trust the citizens.
So you're saying the government came in and capped how much they could get?
That's right. They have done that. They have done
Well,
that.
I'll give you a reason why.
Is that a good
No, Franklin, you can't just. I know, but let me comment on that.
The issue though is, all you're saying is we're having an argument about where to draw the line.
You agree with that?
A lot of times. But the
I
problem
think
with
we've
wrapped it up.
No. Here's the problem.
And I say one other thing.
No. Let me tell you. Here's the problem with the banks. For example, he mentioned that we limit the amount of interest. You and I can come in and we can say, okay, we limited it to 12%. We've looked at it and we've decided that maybe that's too low because the banks, some of them are getting in distress, so we're going to raise it to 14%. If we go to 14 and it's too high, then we may raise it back, lower it back down to 13. You can do that. Once you give someone a service for free, once they become dependent on a service like that, you can't roll it back. You can't tell someone, we've been paying your rent for 40 years, but you don't have a career, you don't have a job, you've depended on government housing, we're going to close the housing.
But wouldn't capitalism correct that problem too if
Maybe
you backed it
The
up?
problem with
maybe 50 years from now.
The problem with capitalism, here's the
But
problem.
what's the casualties in the meantime?
That's the point.
That's the issue.
What happens with the market is the market reacts, but there are some people that get caught in the time between when it's realized and when it's fixed. What the Democrats do, and frankly at this point now the Republicans are doing it too, that those people that are caught between there are too valuable politically. Because we can go in, we can live off of their grief. We can tell them, we're going to take this from someone, we're going to fix this. So instead of letting the market work, like it worked for LASIK surgery, because LASIK wasn't life-threatening. So the market could work there, and the market did work. But we won't do that anymore.
Would you agree that the markets can get so out of balance that they can't work?
I didn't say anymore. I didn't say we shouldn't have any regulation at all.
When Rockefeller owned the oil well, the oil in the ground, the refinery, and the gas station.
Or go to the telephones.
It wasn't a free market anymore.
Remember when they had the telephone thing?
It wasn't a free market anymore. So there is a point where the free market is no longer free.
No one is advocating for an entirely unfettered, unregulated
It's
free
an
market.
argument about where the line is.
No, socialism should be brought in very small, very precise actions. If you want to, like what they did with Social Security, the problem with Social Security is everything changed except Social Security program. And nobody wants to touch it now because they're afraid of the vote reaction, but it has to be fixed. They know it has to be fixed. We know it has to be fixed. But no one wants to touch it. So we're probably, if I had to bet, I think we'll go right up to the point of collapse before they actually do anything.
On Social Security?
Well, on all of it, on Medicare, on Social Security, on welfare, all of that.
And so they'll tax.
And the problem with that is, I said this again on the taxation, when he starts talking about progressive taxation, the majority Peter is never upset when you take money from Paul. Never. Mm-hmm. So as long as it's not coming out of their pocket and it's coming out of someone else's pocket, they will always vote to take more out of that other person's pocket.
People who have Medicare supplements pay for that, right?
Yeah.
Because Medicare sucked.
Yeah.
Because Medicare, socialized medicine sucked.
No, it doesn't suck.
It does.
It provides a floor.
A minimum.
You can take it above that and do very well. You can have Cadillac medicine if you can afford to pay for it.
Which all the unions
if
did.
If you had greed at
Which
some
all
point.
the unions did have Cadillac plans.
Yeah, if you had greed at some point.
So
greed in and of itself is not necessarily bad.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Greed is drive.
But guess what?
If you're stealing from people because of your greed, that's different.
Bill Gates pays the same amount for his Medicare.
Greed is drive. Same thing.
Bill Gates pays the same amount for Medicare as,
Bill Gates is giving away everything that he's earned over these years.
Would there be something intrinsically wrong with charging a premium on Medicare that was related to your actual earnings?
Let me ask you a question, Franklin. Bill Gates,
might not be fair.
All right, hang on, both of y'all. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is giving away all of his money.
He's getting all the benefits.
Hang on. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation giving away all of his money, right? Why should he do that? Why shouldn't he be forced to give it to the government and let the government give it all away?
He was just selling the couch.
I didn't say give it all.
Well, no, my point is you're talking about how great the government is, and we need these government
if
programs, so why should Bill Gates not just be forced to give it to the government?
At $1 billion, had to pay $350 a month as a Medicare premium, would that be a horrible thing?
More than me?
But the problem is, Dee, it'll hit you too. It's never the top 1%. It'll be the top 50% or 60%.
He had to pay $75.
It's not the he's actually right. The reason you got all these liberal Hollywood people that are advocating for higher taxes, Barbara Streisand won't live any worse on $50 million than she would on $60 million. But a guy who makes $300,000 will live a whole lot better on $300 than he will on $200.
But nobody's talking about
you're wrong.
dramatically raising his taxes.
And you're wrong. He is in that same group.
Yeah.
We can't take out the need to drive to get something else, like to get better Medicare.
Progressive taxation will destroy initiative.
We have to have initiative and drive.
If your earnings are coming from the mere fact that I own stock, there's no initiative or drive.
You earned that
I didn't say
stock.
you didn't own it. But that's
And
generating $150 million a year
that
for
money.
me.
They spend it, and it goes into the economy, and it employs. Yes, they do. It employs
In fact,
people.
that's what we just saw with the tax cuts.
The tax cut benefited up to 90% of the people in the
facts
country.
are. I'm not saying there's no economic benefit to it, but the facts are, and all the numbers in now, the vast majority of it did not go into tool and die.
The largest beneficiaries of the tax cut were the people at the bottom end of the economic spectrum. The top end of the spectrum with the tax cut got the smallest amount of increase in their income. The bottom people saw the largest increase in their income.
If you were going to create a society and a government,
JFK said the quickest way to stimulate an economy is to cut taxes. John F. Kennedy.
You agree with that?
No.
John F. Kennedy's quote.
And there's not a shred,
every single time.
A shred of historical evidence.
That's wrong. Every single time we've cut taxes.
That's what I'm saying. If we go back to the historical evidence, when in a 10-year period,
I'll give you an example. Let's look at the famous Reagan tax cuts. Okay, did the economy grow during that period of time? Yes, it did. Mm-hmm. It did.
6-8%.
It did. But guess what else?
What?
During that time, Reagan significantly raised federal spending.
Yes, that's a different issue.
And guess what else? He significantly raised federal hiring.
That's a different issue.
The size of the federal workforce, which is good middle class jobs. Hold on, let me finish.
You're making two arguments. They're separate arguments.
No, it's not.
Yes, they are.
He
screwed up.
Take credit for
he
that.
screwed up. I don't give him credit.
It wasn't.
He screwed up.
If you do a tax cut greatly increase spending and greatly increase hiring, you're going to have a stimulated economy.
Two problems
I agree.
here. Two problems.
Things were good when Reagan was in.
But
But he did all
who
those
sets
things,
the
not
budget?
just one.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we also
Who
got
sets
a
the
massive
budget?
increase in
That's
the
not
deficit
true.
during that
Who
period.
set the budget, Franklin? Tip O'Neill, the Democrats.
Government.
They were
Still
the
did it.
Democrats were in charge of both houses of Congress. They're the ones that raised the spending,
and
that was a mistake.
Spending was proposed by Reagan.
You're saying Reagan did do all that. He's saying you're
Of course, he
saying
didn't do
Reagan
it all
went
by
along
himself.
with it. The Democrats were in control of the
He
budget.
didn't do it all by himself, but we had like a 30% increase in the defense budget,
Which we needed.
which was all proposed
Which we
by
needed.
Reagan.
The
I'm not
only-
saying that.
the
I'm not
only
even arguing that
thing
point.
that the
I'm
Constitution
saying that
requires
as a
government to
stimulus
do
on the economy.
is protection, is the military.
You
That's the
can't
only
say-
requirement in the Constitution is to
You
protect the
can't
populace.
say that it's just the tax cuts when it's the tax cuts plus these things working together.
Every time we've cut spending, total amount of revenue to the government has actually gone
it's not
up.
like it's a hybrid
Every
here. of
time.
this
It is a
thing.
hybrid.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's not a balance, but the important thing is to allow the public to keep more of their own money. It's not the government's money. Franklin and I'll argue this all the time. He'll talk about our money. It's not our money. It's your money. It's my money. It's his money. The government doesn't create
Just
any
like
money.
you told Kevin Brooks.
It's not
He
the
said
government's
it's not.
money.
He said he saved his
He
money.
said it's not our
Yeah,
money.
yeah, yeah.
He said it's federal money. It's all our money.
Well,
And every time we've cut taxes, two things happen. Total amount of revenue to the government actually increased because the pie gets bigger. And the second thing that happens is the wealthy actually pay a higher percentage of the total taxes paid every single time we've cut taxes. The amount percentage paid by he's talking about progressive taxes. The percentage paid by the wealthy went up every single time we've cut taxes.
well, here's what I would say. There's a lot more corporate welfare than there is individual
And
welfare.
I wouldn't argue to get rid of that.
Okay. I don't know why his
Yeah.
party isn't focused on that. If they're really serious about fiscal
we've
responsibility.
agreed. Well, first
but
off,
they're not.
one
I've
of the
never
main-
heard the term
All right.
corporate welfare.
Yes, but here's one of the main
That's a good point.
Here's one of the main
Subsidy
reasons
economic
that I don't disagree philosophically with him. The problem is that's in the discretionary budget. You can get rid of the entire discretionary budget and you still have a deficit. It's Medicare, Medicaid, and welfare.
I'm simply saying if you really believe in fiscal responsibility, show some initiative.
All right,
and
so let me
leadership
give
on
you
that.
a Barack Obama quote that'll
And
show.
then it's a lot easier to
This
go
will
to
show.
somebody else and say.
Barack Obama had a quote. This will show exactly how the Democrats really believe about this. So he made an argument that this tax rate was too low and that they needed to generate more revenue. And I don't even remember which tax it was, but it was a specific tax. And so he raised that tax rate. And his whole sales pitch was we need to generate more revenue. Well, when he raised the tax, it did the same thing that McWhorter did with our things. The total amount of revenue actually declined because people avoided the tax. Well, when Obama was asked about it pointedly, he finally gave a straight answer. He said, yes, I know the total revenue went down, but it's the more fair thing to do. So Republicans tend to look at taxation as revenue generating. What do we need to generate? What does it do to the economy? You listen to everything he said today. It's about fairness and equality. They view taxation as a way to
not.
level the playing field.
It's not about fairness and equality.
That's all you've
It's
talked
not
about all day.
Fairness and equality.
All right,
all
so
you've talked
give
about.
that rebuttal. Give that
It's
rebuttal.
that the
'Cause he put it in a pretty good nutshell.
The economic system we have ought to cause the vast majority of people's situation to get better.
What if they suck? What if as individuals they just
Why
suck?
should
They're
those
lazy.
people-
What if they're lazy?
Why
They
should
won't
they
make good
support that
decisions.
system? Why should
Franklin.
they support that system? You know what? Back in the 20s,
Listen to what he said.
Back in the 20s, there was a real communist party in America,
Oh,
which
yeah.
we rejected.
There's a real communist party today.
No,
it's
there's
called
not.
Alexander Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah.
Nonsense.
AOC.
Nonsense. There was a real one then that was actually gaining ground in America.
And it was on
this?
the left.
In the 1920s.
It was on the left. They were idolizing
reason-
Mussolini
and the
on the
reason-
left.
So this is nothing new.
Time magazine's Man of the Year in 27 was Mussolini.
The reason, well, Mussolini wasn't a communist, he was a fascist. It's a different thing.
Well, it's still on the left.
But,
Still on the left, right?
Yes.
no, I wouldn't say that at all.
Franklin, Time magazine was the liberal, the communist.
Fascism is an uber powerful
So
executive.
this thing we're
That's not a
experiencing
Democratic
nowadays
idea.
is nothing new, right?
No.
It's nothing
The
new.
point I'm making is there was a real issue going on. It wasn't just in the Northeast, it was in the Southeast too. Right? It was happening. And the reason is because the system was so dangerously out of balance.
I
had
think
these huge fortunes.
you agree with that. Can it get out of balance?
Of course it can.
No. I think you have to have some regulation in the market, but I think the thing about what he's talking about is he's talking about all these uber wealthy people, but everybody's income has gone up in America. Everyone's income has gone up. I'll go back to what I said before. The single greatest health affliction of the chronically poor in America is obesity.
Here's that.
They have too much to eat.
The average CEO of a Fortune 500 company is not personally risking their wealth building the factory. Let's be clear about that. They just work for the company.
The stockholders.
Over the last 30 years.
The stockholders.
Yeah,
little
Over the last 30
people.
years.
Yeah.
Over the last 30 years, the CEO's pay has gone up 125%. The employees' wages have gone up, and we're talking about adjusted for inflation on both cases, has gone up about 15%.
Everybody's gone up though.
And that's all capital.
Look,
No, but hold on.
I'm
But
not-
30 years ago, the CEO typically made about 8-9 times what an assembly line worker makes. Now, they make 150 times what it is. That is out of balance.
Do you think a CEO's job has changed any from the horse and buggy company?
Yeah, and maybe
to the multinational
and maybe there's less of them
I
too.
said a Fortune 500 company. I didn't say mom and pop tool and die down here.
Franklin, a horse and buggy was a Fortune 500 company
It's
at the
out
time.
of whack. It's out of balance.
See, but
Yeah,
listen
it
to
was
what-
a big
he just admitted what I said. He's not talking about dollars. He's talking about fairness and equality. So he wants
I'm
the
talking
government
about
to
social
enforce.
mobility.
He wants the
And that's the
government to
difference.
enforce
The
equality.
ability for people to grow and move up in the society.
The Frito-Lay
It's-
guy
it's
grew and moved up.
It's absolutely two theories. And it's a matter of where you
believes
draw the
in-
line.
He believes that government should decide what's fair and what's
That's
not,
not
and
true.
who gets
That's
what
not
and
true.
who
It
doesn't.
never
and
It
you
is.
feel
That's
like
what you
that.
just
You
said.
feel like that people.
I think for the most part, you should be left for your own initiative and drive to take you.
because cream will rise to the top.
The least amount.
But
of
now let me
government.
throw up this scenario that not many people understand it when I try to articulate it because I'm not very good at it. But let's say our society wasn't based on money, but it was based on playing the piano. In other words, I know this doesn't make any sense, but I can't play the piano. So I couldn't, I'd be broke.
You mean you physically weren't capable of learning to play the piano?
It's not in my DNA. I couldn't do it if you gave me
That's not true.
1,000 years.
That's not true. You can't do it because you're looking back on your life experience and saying, I couldn't do it. You could do it.
It'd be a lot harder for me.
What if you were going to starve to death? You think there's anything you couldn't do if you were going to starve to death?
I'm just saying.
When you say before
I'm just
money,
saying we have an obligation
here's how this-
at some
but
point
here's how this
to
works.
help the other people.
We've always done
to help
it.
us all.
We've always done it as a society. We are the most charitable country in the world. We give more to causes, but the government is actively eroding at that. They are making it harder. One of the proposals the Democrats did was to do away with the charitable deduction on your income tax. So you wouldn't be able to deduct anything that you donated. Well, what does that do? It's real simple what it does. It destroys charities and it moves that power to the government.
Good point.
Standards of living relative to other nations, our European allies, have been falling over the last 10 years.
Look,
What is the answer for that? What's the explanation?
Don't know.
well, probably
It's just
because,
true. It has been.
Look, here's the problem with that kind of statement. I don't know, but I'm going to tell you. We could have fallen or they could have risen.
I'm not suggesting we
If they
become-
rise, the standards relative to each other's change, but it doesn't mean that we lost. We haven't lost. Income has gone up in America over the last 50 years.
The problem
for
is-
every class.
The problem is
So you're saying that the capitalism system
Works.
actually
It
raises
works.
the
It
other.
it raises everybody.
You agree with that?
everybody.
Obviously
no.
you don't.
It
Not
raises
everybody.
everybody.
Of course not.
Look, if you're telling me I can't go out here and find someone that it hasn't, I can, but I can probably also find someone.
We're not talking about outliers. We're talking about
decisions.
the masses.
It raises everybody.
Well, but I mean, his example's an outlier. What, every janitor can come up with an idea that makes him a millionaire?
Bill Gates did.
Yeah. He's not a janitor.
Bill Gates didn't even graduate.
Yeah.
He didn't even graduate from college.
He had an Ivy League education.
He did it in his garage.
But he had the ability and the training and the education to do
We'd be better off in a society if we made it more
80%
possible for
of
somebody
all-
to get on first base.
80% of all
Absolutely.
millionaires are first-generation millionaires. 80%. What does that tell you?
we don't
They
have-
weren't millionaires. They weren't born millionaires.
Maybe our society should be more focused on helping children up to 18 years old.
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
because at that point, maybe we've allowed them. Everybody up until 18 gets a floor of this and that.
Here's what I can tell you. All those uber wealthy people I'm talking about, if you told them that their taxes were going to be 38%, they would have done cartwheels and somersaults and said, boy, that'd be great. As soon as we go to 38, you're talking about how you can't take things away from people. It's human nature. As soon as they go to 38, they go, oh, it really needs to be 32. And when it's 32, it really needs to be 28.
So here's the
Yeah, so now
And
you
it
got
doesn't-
human nature on both
And it
parts.
doesn't matter how good it's working
the
for
problem.
them.
Yeah.
Oh, it could be better.
Here's the problem. Back then, you had all those uber wealthy, the Rockefellers, and they were way up here, and the bulk of the people were down here. There wasn't much in the middle. We have a healthy middle class. We have a healthy upper middle class. When they start raising taxes, they don't raise it just on the top 1%.
we built that middle
They raise
class
it on the
on
top
government
50%.
investment.
And it does. People like us, who I've worked my whole life, I've been very blessed, don't get me wrong, but my granddad worked 7 days a week until he was 88 years old. Dad worked 6 days a week, went into the office Monday through Saturday. I've worked my whole life. I can't retire. The reason you see lawyers and doctors and business people who don't retire, it's because if we're not in the office working, we don't have anything. We don't have a company
made
that
my
gives
point.
us a retirement. But Franklin, I'm okay with
The
that.
middle class is being squeezed.
But you will raise my taxes when
We're
you do
being
this.
squeezed.
They will raise my taxes, your taxes, and his taxes.
Doesn't have
It
to
won't
be,
be
huh?
just on the upper billionaires.
Eventually,
It'll be on us.
Eventually, they'll come for
It's
theirs.
always on us.
But John, if because they took 2% more of your income, the people below you are able to pay for more dental services, that's a good thing for you. You'll
Franklin,
make more money.
It's my money. It's not yours. It's not the government's. And there's a fundamental
We
difference
built that
here.
middle class on government investment.
We did
The
not.
TVA.
You don't think we did?
No.
You don't think the TVA isn't responsible for vast swaths of the wealth in this area? It is. You think public schools aren't responsible for
No,
that?
they're
They are.
absolutely not. They are
The
absolutely
railroad.
You
not.
think
No,
that-
the railroad was private.
You think the GI
For the
Bill
most
isn't
part.
responsible for vast wealth in this area? It is. Those are all things the government did.
They were all
which gave
socialist.
people help.
But what
when
did
they
the
needed
GI
it,
what
and they
did the
used
GI
that help
hang on a
to
minute.
make their lives better.
Basically, a socialized program.
But from a no.
And it made money for the government,
From a
too.
philosophical program, what did you have to do to get the GI Bill?
Goes on.
You had to
Sure.
do something.
Yeah.
Sure.
You had to do something for it.
You got a point there.
Nobody said
They didn't
you
just
can't
hand
do
it
that.
to you.
So was the Civilian Conservation Corps and the WPA.
The WPA
You had to do
was a
something
waste
for it.
of money.
No, you had
They wasted
No, it kept
millions.
So you're
people
not
at-
advocating not
Do
doing
you know
nothing
what the
for it?
people?
not.
Do you know what the
Of course
people in
not.
the 30s and the 40s called the WPA? We piddle along.
Oh,
Yeah, guess what? It kept them from starving to death.
it worked.
Actually, the
And guess what? That's money that's
FDR's
spent in the
policies.
economy.
There's a book called The Quiet Man, I believe it is. I may be wrong. Anyway, FDR's policies, the unemployment, all of that was clearing up in the early 30s. His policies that he did with all of his basically socialism that he crammed down our throat extended that. Up until Obama, that was the worst recovery in the history of the country. Because of FDR's policies, not in spite of them.
But now they say that in the late 1940s, everybody above their fireplace had a picture of Roosevelt.
They
course
did.
they
And they said they asked the people.
'Cause he
They'd
was
say,
there- 'cause he saved their lives.
'Cause that's-
they'd say, do you think Roosevelt was your savior, and they'd say, no, I know he was.
Yeah, because that's their daddy. And that's what Franklin sells to people.
Government
will be your daddy.
Much better if they starved to death and died.
All right, I'll give you a perfect example. Why
better.
was
they
there
were
not
sold on it.
Hang on. Why was there not a single Jeep made by Ford Motor Company in the Army during the 40s?
Because the government was giving it to the money to give somebody else to
All right,
build.
so Willie's made those. All right, so what happened was FDR and his economic people came in and they said, we're going to set a floor that you can't, or a ceiling, sorry, that you can't charge above this for your cars, okay? And so Henry Ford looked and said, all right, I'm going to charge $1,000 below that amount. FDR and his people went and said, no, you can't do that. Here's what you're going to charge, because we're protecting the people from you car people overcharging them. And he said, but I'm not going to overcharge them. I'm going to charge them less than your ceiling. They banned Henry Ford from any government contracts because he was charging too little for his cars. That's what government control ends up. It's power and control. So instead of you and I, and Franklin and I, looking at that going, well, that's great. We appreciate you doing that. Go ahead. Just like the FDA is now charging these distilleries for producing something we asked them to do. That's what government control leads to. So the reason there's not a single Ford that was in the Jeeps in the Army is because the government punished Henry Ford for charging too little for his cars.
Except the government.
Almost like the milk thing where they paid you so much for milk, right? What was that program called?
Well, there's all kinds. There's just,
where they give you
supports.
they give you so much money for not making milk.
Sure, it's to keep the price.
That's where this all leads.
Sure.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, without it, you lose all those family.
Why would
farms and
FDR do
you just
that?
get
Why would
more-
FDR have punished Henry Ford for charging too little?
Well, the answer to that question is because he wanted Ford to have a certain amount of money that was going back into the economy.
So in other words, Henry Ford, who's the most successful inventor at the time, the most successful businessman at the time, wasn't smart enough to do what he wanted to do.
He was also taking over lots of his factories and using them for war production for other things.
So in other words, the government wanted control.
Yeah.
Henry Ford wasn't allowed to be in charge.
Last time I checked, World War II turned out pretty well. I thought we did a good job with that.
It ended.
See, that's
Apparently
a
he
straw
thinks
argument.
we did a bad job.
That's a straw argument.
No, it's
that's
not.
what he just did.
You're saying we mismanaged World War II.
He just did what they did to Paul Ryan.
Maybe it was different times.
He just
Of course
did what
it was a different time.
Yeah.
In other words, if I can't make an argument,
it.
I will just attack you personally and destroy the whole conversation. That's why we're not going to solve these things.
No, the answer is you can't have it both ways.
I don't want it both ways. I want government out of my life as much as possible.
Then we'd still be fighting World War II if the government hadn't taken over production and said, this is the product we need and it's what you're going to make.
Then you're saying Hitler might have taken over.
That has nothing to do with telling
We don't
Henry
know.
Ford,
We'll never know.
we don't want you to sell your product cheaper to help the American people.
The last time I checked, overwhelming numbers of Americans thought we did a good job in World War II.
See, that is a straw. That has nothing to do with what I was talking about.
I don't think anybody can argue that, right?
Nobody said anything about that.
Everybody there rolled up their sleeves and participated.
And
in it
Henry
together.
Ford did too. And he said, I'm
agreed
going to sell my
sacrifice
product
together.
cheaper. And the government punished him because they weren't in control.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Because this conversation has to come to an end. In spite of all this, I have nothing but the highest regard for my friend.
He's so intelligent. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
I want it to be clear, okay? Because people get confused about that sometimes.
Now, let me say something, because I thought about this a lot.
Okay. And I appreciate your approach to this conversation.
What Franklin and I did for 7 or 8 years on Whoop Radio, I think would be a really good lesson or example for the country right now. And what I mean by that is we could argue, and I'm sure there are times where I probably pissed him off a little bit. There's a time or two he pissed me off a little bit. But every day that we walked out of that radio station, we were friends. We were talking about, there were times where I'd go to him and say, Franklin, I heard this, I thought you might need to know. He would come to me and say, hey, I heard this, I thought you might need to know. So we could argue an issue, we could argue a point, we could be heated, we could be emotional, but at the end of the day, it was the argument on the table.
Yeah.
It wasn't, he and I.
I wish the marriage worked
And
that way.
I wish we could do that as a political society more, where you could debate. We've lost the ability to debate.
I believe you're exactly right.
His legal profession, that's what they do. And there are standards. There are things you don't do to the other lawyer, in court. And some of that may be blurring too, I don't know. But their profession is actually what we should be able to do on political discussions and political debates. And I'm not always complimentary of lawyers.
Hey,
so.
You're about as smart on this stuff as I've ever think, and you're very compassionate, and you've got some great ideas. And let's conclude it.
Thank you.
All right.